Welcome to the June 24th, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. First item on our agenda is public input. If there's anyone here who wants to speak to us about something that isn't going to otherwise come up on the agenda, this is the time. Seeing none. Next item is board reorganization. I suggest that we start with chairman, and then whoever that becomes gets to do the rest of this. And
Trying to get out of any extra work, Bob? Trying to get out of work?
well, I know it's, whoever's the chairman could assign it to someone else.
Well,
Yeah.
this is true.
I suggest that, a little like we did a week or two ago, that we get all the nominations, and then if we have more than one, we'll see how everybody feels and figure out, basically count up the votes. This is the five of us doing this. No. All right, nominations for chairman.
I nominate Dave Robbins for chair.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none. Want to make that a motion, Linda?
Yes, I move that we nominate David Robbins for elect
Yeah.
David Robbins for
Chair.
chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted. And now I can hand this to David.
All righty. Open the floor to nominations for vice chair.
I move that we elect Bob Hassinger for vice chair,
Second.
because I don't want it.
Moved and seconded that Bob be elected vice chair. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Open the floor to nominations for clerk.
We have kind of a tradition that the newest on the board ends up clerk. All the clerk really does is they read the new motions when they come in. It's considered kind of a nice thing for them to get used to doing. So in that sense, I move that we elect Jason Wood to be clerk.
Justin.
Joe Wood.
Justin.
Sorry, Justin.
Joe Wood is a relative.
Yes, that's why I have a problem.
Yeah.
He's a brother-in-law. Okay. Yes, I do nominate you.
Second.
All righty. Moved and seconded that Justin Wood be elected clerk. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Okay, now we could change the signs here.
Oh, it's okay. Okay. Well, that's going on. That really, I think we have to keep Bob on at CMRPC, considering he's the current chair.
Yeah, Commission chairman of the Transportation Planning Committee, member since 1991. I was the new guy on board in the spring of 91, but they looked around and said, "You look like a good one for us to send to CMRPC instead of being clerk."
Okay. I will interpret that as a motion by Linda to designate
Yes.
Bob as our CMRPC delegate.
As one of them, we're not quite sure if we have a second one.
I'll second the motion.
Moved and seconded that Bob Hassinger be designated the board's primary delegate to CMRPC. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Next item is a planning board representative to the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee, which is currently me. The Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee is, we hope, somewhere near completing their job.
Yeah.
We may hear a little bit more about that later from the staff
Makes sense to
report.
nominate Dave then.
You want to continue in that?
Yes.
Okay. I'll second Bob's motion then.
Alrighty, moved and seconded that Dave Robbins continue as the board's designated representative to the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Next is to designate a member of the board to the Town-Owned Land Committee.
Does that committee even exist?
I don't think it's been highly active since Roger Holman passed away.
I mean, if somebody wants to volunteer, but I'm not sure that even exists. We do this every year.
I know we do this every year. I mean, the challenge is that we're getting close to, with all of these 61 chapter 61 lands and
Oh,
other
yeah.
issues. I see at least the need for revisiting that. It does show it's still active. If
Does that show how many members it's got?
shows current member 1, and then if oh, I guess and
Funny thing.
Linda we're the only one appointing it. So, you know, we have two options here. I mean, it is a valid committee. At some point, I believe that there'll be the need, especially maybe with this new Board of Selectmen and looking at affordable housing, looking at recreation land, especially coming out of the open space plan. I see the need for such a committee to occur again, but that doesn't necessitate that we actually do anything now and that we hold off. And if they reconstitute it, then
Then we appoint someone then?
exactly.
Okay, it's okay by me.
I have no concerns with doing that.
Yeah, that, if that committee does get reactivated, then that would
They'd be
probably
probably
appropriate.
coming up with a new charge and all
Yeah.
that stuff. They'd at least be
Yeah.
revisiting that.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
I'll take it as the consensus of the board that we leave that position vacant for now, given the uncertain nature of the activity of the committee. Next item on the list would be a planning board representative to the Community Preservation Committee. For the past year, our departed member Sharon Carol Tidman was our representative to the CPC, as I recall. Prior to Sharon's tenure in that committee for 1 year, I served as the board's rep to that committee. If anybody was particularly interested in serving on the CPC, speak now.
I think good idea to tell people that that's actually a pretty important committee.
Yes.
That's not a joke. That committee is one that meets regularly and has money and is an actually important committee. So if somebody is interested in being on it, speak up.
What is the commitment, like, how often do they meet?
The CPC meets once a month. If memory serves, it's on the fourth Thursday of every month that the CPC meets.
Okay.
And what they do is review requests for the expenditure of community preservation funds for any of four purposes: open space, historic preservation, affordable housing, and recreation development.
So in this coming year, it's going to be maybe a little bit more, meeting a little bit more frequently than in the past. In the past, they take sort of that window off between annual and the fall annual town meetings, and maybe not meet until for a couple months following town meeting on either side, because the main purpose to meet is to then start going over the process for new requests and also to follow up on existing projects. Planning department is working with the CPC right now. I have a near final draft of a request for proposals to go out and select a consultant to work with the CPC to develop the first CPC plan since like 2007.
Which plan?
A CPC plan.
That is one of the obligations of
Yes.
CPC under the enabling legislation.
So I foresee once August gets here through September, and then basically through a 8-month process, working with a consultant, holding some public meetings, and preparing, hopefully for annual town meeting the following May, a plan that then can provide a direction for then future CPC projects and establish a annual process for updating that plan and updating projects. So there'll be a little bit more work, mainly because of the development of that plan.
I've always kind of been interested in it, but if they meet the last Thursday or the fourth Thursday of the month, that's when I have 2 meetings in Worcester for CMRPC.
Right.
So I don't think that, no matter how much I'd like to.
And the source of the money for the CPC is actually our taxes. It's a certain,
It's taxes on real estate sales, isn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
no, so that's where that money comes from, and it's a substantial chunk of money.
Yeah, and there's the state, I think it's a decreasing amount each year these days, but the state has a contribution that it
Yep.
makes too.
Yep. In the early years, when there
It
were
was
fewer
substantial.
communities signed up on this, the state had, it was pretty close to, I think at one point it was almost a 1-to-1 match.
Yeah.
But it's a lot less than that now, but still it's something.
The reason I asked all these questions was I haven't followed really about the Community Preservation Committee, the CPC. I have been following the Grafton Public Library.
Oh,
yeah.
oh, you can have that.
Right.
Well, then I think you need the CPC then.
No,
The library meets the same night we,
not always.
most of the
I
time.
know. A lot of the times, unfortunately,
Okay.
their meeting is scheduled at exactly when ours is, but not always, which means that you can get to some of them. And I would definitely encourage that. And I'd be happy to relinquish that. Happy.
So I would, my passion being on the a known area was the Grafton Public Library. I do
That's
want to
fine.
see that built out.
Yeah.
It's all its glory. I would wait for that.
Okay, so now we still need CPC.
See?
So I don't have a particularly strong interest, but I absolutely don't mind taking that on for CPC.
Okay,
I'll
I
second
nominate you.
that. I second that.
Okay.
All right. Been moved and seconded that Justin be the board's representative to the Community Preservation Committee. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Next, we have a Grafton Center Study Committee.
Does that even exist anymore?
Sure it does.
It
It
sure,
has one member,
it's just-
me.
yes, it is.
I established
And
it while
it
I was
is-
chair many years ago. It hasn't been active lately, but we've been talking about a possibility of actually reactivating it, to look at some of the center,
Well, especially with the library.
and everything that's going on up there. The DPW.
Yeah.
Yes, there's-
All that town land is through there.
There's, I think there's some work coming down the pike for that.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the end of June. We're getting close to the end of June when Mass Development's supposed to be making announcements on funding for technical assistance, which I had applied for funding to look at basically not just the DPW site, but the DPW site, how it wraps around to the White Barn, but then looking at from DPW all the way to the library for improvement and potential for redevelopment. So if we do get that, then that will be at least one of those things that we're going to have public meetings, solicit just like we did for North Grafton as well as the Worcester Street project.
The interesting part of this is that that's a committee that the planning board created. And we decide about it. So we have more flexibility about,
Yep.
for example, looking for membership and
Yep.
all of that. But, I've been holding the spot warm for a long time.
If you want to turn it over to me, it's okay. If you want to stay on it, that's okay too. You prefer
Yeah.
to be on it, I can
Yeah.
tell. Okay. Okay, then I
We
nominate.
might figure out a way to get you to be a member too.
Okay, I nominate Bob for the Grafton Center Study Committee.
Second.
Moved and seconded that Bob Hassinger be designated the planning board, the one and only member at this point of the Grafton Center Study Committee, with future membership and activity to be determined.
Yes.
Discussion of the motion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Okay. And I'll
Public
nominate-
Library Planning and Building
And I'll
Committee.
nominate, Prabhu, and I hope
No.
I am pronouncing this correctly. Please correct
You
me.
got that perfect.
Thank you. For the Public Library Planning and Building Committee. And you may battle out with them over the time.
And I will second.
Excellent. So, moved and seconded that Prabhu be the board's representative to the Grafton Public Library Planning and Building Committee. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And
Carried
aye.
unanimously. Last but not least on this list is,
I move that we authorize the town planner, our one and only Joseph Lyden, to be able to sign payroll and sign A&R plans.
Second.
moved and seconded that the board authorize the town planner to sign payroll and to sign A&R plans. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
You're gonna get paid.
Carried unanimously. We are now fully reorganized for the moment.
Okay, so just one question, and Bob, I threw this over to you because I think like 2 years ago we brought this form up. This is CMRPC, 4 active members. It shows 3 seats, 1 alternate, with planning board identifying 2.
Yeah, and it's not clear who appoints the alternate on that list.
I always thought the alternate was the selectman, but
It doesn't say there.
I know it just says
But-
position.
But CMRPC sends out a letter every year, and they sent it this year, and it does, I think, explain.
Okay. I'll just find the letter, and then if there's anything that needs to be added,
Yeah.
we'll just cover it at the next meeting.
But we could do a second
Yes.
delegate.
Yep.
This position would be a regular delegate. There are 4 or 5. There are 4 quarterly meetings in the annual meeting, more or less. Beyond that, you can get involved in committees and that sort of thing, to whatever degree you like. And we have a fair number of, we just had the annual dinner, and it was out at Salem Cross Inn. That was, it reminded me of being in a can of sardines, because we had so many people. A really great turnout. But the annual meetings around this time of year, and it's usually nice. The other 4 meetings are
Scattered.
usually up in Worcester.
Is that the committee that is involved or helps out with the MBTA? The one that you talked about in the last meeting, Joe? Improvements to the Grafton train station, so on and so forth. Is that-
Yes, and yes, as far as from a regional capacity. Regional transportation plan, looking at not only working with the state as far as commuter rail, but also freight, looking at bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, and then also assisting region with economic development activities. So CMRPC, Central Mass Regional Planning, provides a large multifaceted role as far as supporting overall planning within the communities around Worcester that are part of our region, and have a voice in all of that. So.
So Bob is already on that CMRPC, right?
Yeah,
And you said,
I'm on some of those committees and things too,
okay,
like the executive committee, the transportation planning committee, and the community development committee. The only one I'm not on is legislative affairs.
and you said it meets once a quarter and there's one annual meeting.
That's the basic commitment. And the quarterly meetings, we do a little bit of business, and then there's usually a speaker with something interesting about, somehow related to planning and whatnot. So someone who's kind of interested in the broad
Okay.
outlook of
The region.
planning.
But beyond that, if you're on a committee, beyond just the general, there are more meetings.
Oh.
He attends probably 4 to 5 meetings a month
Okay.
with CMRPC. So if you go that far, you're going to get into a real commitment.
That's sort of if you choose to.
To get into that
And
commitment.
there are only so many seats on the committees.
Exactly.
It just so happened that they were repopulating the transportation committee in that spring of '91. So I showed up and at the annual meeting and got put on the T committee.
Once you're on a committee, it's almost impossible to get off.
Oh, it's possible. It never happens, but
Theoretically possible, right?
procedurally possible.
Yes.
So do we have anybody, or, we don't, it doesn't have to be a board member.
I would be interested in that.
You're interested? So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded that Prabhu be the board's second delegate to the CMRPC. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously.
That's everything.
Anything else under reorganization? Don't think so. Moving on then. Our next action.
At some point, we sign the signature sheets.
Now, yeah.
The other action item we have is a site plan determination. We have a request from the Reunion Grill at 198 Worcester Street for consideration as a minor modification, a change in seating plan.
Which represent either place or?
Either place.
Okay. Whichever place you feel more comfortable at.
As long as you've got the microphone.
Oh, is that if I put this here? Just a
Well,
plan that I had. I don't know if the board members want plans. I just revised some numbers on the seating. That's all. I don't think I have enough for everyone.
It's okay, I can share.
Thank you.
I don't mind sharing either.
So my name is Paul Epkaren, I'm the architect on the project, and we're here for a minor modification to do some exterior seating. We're looking for about 14 seats. I know there was some misrepresentation or confusion on the original plan that I submitted because we were over our I showed more seats than we were approved for. That wasn't intentional. That was a master plan that I did, so we coordinate lighting and tables and all that stuff, and it just went by me. So I brought this that has the revised 151 total seating. So the 14 seats that we're looking out front, we would be subtracting the 14 seats from the interior restaurant during the summer months and using them outside. The place that we're putting it, it's under an existing, if you look to the right, there's some pictures on that plan, under an existing roof covering. And then we also have, since we opened, some planter boxes, so the tables would be located behind the planter boxes, no higher than the planter boxes. And then, of course, hopefully cars are parked in front of it, so that's the presentation, and we're looking for 14 seats on the exterior.
are the planters there now?
Yes,
Okay.
they're on the picture you can see right there, but they're there since we opened, yeah.
And that booth in the corner seats for? Is that what I'm looking at?
Well, so what I did is that's kind of a couch
Okay.
area. I did 5 different versions of it with all two tops and some 4 tops,
Yep.
2 tops and a couch. We came out to 14,
Okay.
just the way it is. So I'm not sure. I don't want to speak for what they're going to purchase. If they're going to get a couch there, if they're just going to use the tables from inside and bring them out or put them in storage.
Yeah, I noticed in the material that was submitted, there were 3 variations of the
Yes.
outside seating.
Yes,
All the same number of seats,
correct.
but just 3 different possible
That,
configurations.
exactly, yeah.
So,
This would be still part of the private property, right? It's still property of Reunion.
Well,
Yes, yes,
but that's part of the rental unit, as well as being owned by the people.
correct.
But yeah, it's back under here.
Okay.
They're not needing to do any construction on this is what I'm getting out of that.
Yeah, there's no construction on it, and everything that we're doing on the exterior meets state and local building codes. It's all the ADA compliant,
Yep.
so we have no issues with that.
Joe, you mentioned getting an opinion from,
Yeah, so, and let me just bring it on screen. Building inspector this morning, had, dropped off a letter, reviewing the material that was submitted. For comment number 1, and Paul's addressed this, that the original floor plan that was submitted on June 19th didn't meet the original layout that was approved by the board. So that's been resolved now with this submission. Just to follow up, last year the board had similarly made a determination that the changes to the site plan were minor and in conformance with previous approvals, and established the seating at 152. Second, he identified that the floor plan doesn't match the proposed seating layout that was submitted for permit of construction. What was submitted originally and then what is here at least is in line with what's there currently on the premises. Third comment, he's identifying that sheet A1.0 does not depict means of egress path along with minimum dimensions, so the building inspector is requesting that there be dimensions identifying that it meets the minimum requirements, and also that it doesn't depict egress lighting. That was the 4th comment. The 5th one is a concern from the building inspector on how removing tables and chairs from the private dining room for the outdoor seating would be enforced, mainly in that our zoning bylaw identifies the number of parking spaces based on the number of seats. Here, the proposal is to remove 14 to then allow for 14 to be outside. So that's conceivable that then during winter months, you're not going to have that outdoor seating, so those 14 tables stay inside. And then in nicer weather, depending on the days, you could have them outside or then inside. And how is it enforceable that if they're outside of the building inspector going there on a daily basis, what is the mechanism for enforcement? There's not a special permit. Basically, it probably has to deal with more of the occupancy that's issued for the building than anything else, and whether or not the outside triggers an increase in occupancy that's permitted by the building department. Last comment is that under our zoning bylaws, if an establishment increases seating, the parking will need to be addressed. So again, this sort of falls with number 5. That is the outdoor an increase or is it a swap, and then how does it enforce? Number 6 was when we were reviewing it prior to Paul's revision to the plan. It showed more parking. More seats within the restaurant, a total of 174 as far as our counting, compared to the permitted 152. Again, Paul corrected that with this revised plan. So I think the number 3 and 4, dealing with documentation that can be submitted to the building inspector, because those two things are tied to occupancy. The 5th one, which is really about removing the tables from the dining room to allow for the outdoor seating, how that's enforced. That's a general question for the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw doesn't have provisions for outdoor seating. It doesn't treat it any differently than indoor seating. So that ordinarily, if this was coming to the board with outdoor seating, we'd be adding up everything together and basing the parking on that. Here we know we're on a constrained site. Parking is constrained, that there's agreements between adjacent business owners to allow for additional parking to satisfy the demand. It becomes a question as far as what that means, how with outdoor seating, how do we know that it's complying with the intention of this floor plan for removing those 14 seats while the outdoor seating is being used.
We have a couple of precedents on outdoor seating. I don't remember exactly how we came down on them or exactly how we handled them, but there's the New Cumberland Farms had a bit of outdoor seating. And of course Dunkin' Donuts came in and wanted to add an area of seating.
With the Dunkin' Donuts, I believe with the additional table that was then outside, I believe they had identified that they already had an excess parking, so that inside and outside was accommodated. For the Cumberland Farms, that was prior to my being here. I don't know if there was a similar thing that those were then viewed as seats added to the total, as far as you have for retail space, the amount of parking that is needed for the retail space for inside the gas station building, and whether or not those were viewed as seatings outside like a restaurant. So we're dealing with two different provisions. I can go back and look at the Cumberland Farms. The main thing is that with the retail, the board would have had to have then separated out how it viewed the food, and whether or not that was almost like adding a restaurant provision where, if memory serves, they have 8 seats outside. So they would have required, because you'd round up to 3 parking spaces because you have 1 for every 3. I'd have to go back and just look to see how that was added up. And Paul, I don't know if you're able to address this. My understanding was also that the outdoor seating was not to be used during all restaurant seatings, that it was primarily like a Friday and Saturday. I believe that's what Sargon had said.
I can't address that. I heard kind of the same thing too, but I don't know the exact hours.
Okay.
Would this be putting the tables out and taking them in, or would this be they're out there and they get used at the times they get used, and the function room just goes without those tables all through?
Yeah, through the next, we're almost in July, August, maybe in the beginning of September. I mean, in all honesty, the restaurant industry is a little more quiet in the summer months. So the idea of moving those tables out, leaving them out there is the intent.
Yeah. When I looked at it, I was a little concerned about, I guess that the door that you're using into that area is an egress from the inside, and is it an acceptable situation there as far as getting out.
It is. We are maintaining egress throughout that entire, I actually put a dimension on it, but even though we're going outside through that seating, it's no different than going, we have the minimum requirements for distance travel and corridor width that we're maintaining on the outside space.
Because with the planters in there, you can't just come straight out. You have to go back
Correct.
towards the front doors. That's what worries me, because
Yeah.
there'll be people coming out the main doors too, and traffic around
Mm-hmm.
into one another. But I guess really the first question is, are we gonna handle it as a minor modification?
So, and just to sort of get back to the memo that I had prepared, wherever it was, under this provision, section 1.3.3.10, the Grafton zoning bylaw establishes.
Could you put that against the podium?
Yeah, of course I could.
Yeah, okay, good.
The Grafton zoning bylaw establishes a process by which an applicant may request a minor change to an approved site plan without receiving an application or conducting a public hearing. The board's action is to make a determination whether the change is substantially different than the material and information used in making the original site plan approval decision. If the board determines the change is substantially different, the applicant can go through the normal application process to modify the site plan approval. So that's the provisions of the zoning bylaw that this falls under, that the applicant is making that request.
But the parking requirement and the number of seats was a very central issue.
Yes.
And I don't remember whether the special permit speaks to that at all.
We didn't have a special permit.
There wasn't a
for
special
this.
permit for that?
No.
Just
No.
site plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things, just to sort of, and not to push back on the building inspector's letter, but that from enforcement, I think it's the same level of enforcement as if they had decided to put 4 additional tables in the dining room without coming back. It's not something that you would necessarily know that had happened unless you all of a sudden received a complaint from visitors inside saying, oh, this is packed a little bit more than it normally is. So I think from an enforcement standpoint, whether it's outside or removing things inside, it still is the same item as far as enforcement's the same. It's a visit to the site to periodically check to make sure that the occupancy as identified by the planning board site plan approval is being adhered to. Challenge is that, you know, depending on the seatings for 4 months out of the year, that's maybe when you have the outdoor seating, and then it comes in. It may be a portion of the week that it is being used. It becomes a question as far as then what happens in that off time. Just making sure that, okay, now those 14 tables are brought out of storage from inside the restaurant and set up. Realistically, maybe not, depending on how busy that dining room is, or on whether or not people even do this. So,
You know, that room is focused on events, on private events.
It is a couple times a week, but it's also part of the dining room.
I've never seen it, I've never seen anyone seated in it. Of course, we haven't been there that many times.
Sure, yeah.
Never
No, there
seen
are quite a
anybody-
few times
any
on
patrons.
Friday and Saturday nights, but
No, we wouldn't be trying.
For what it's worth, having been to a private event in that room, that particular private event, there were a few general, at one end of the room, our private event was in one, about 2/3 of the room, but part of it was used for some overflow seating from the main restaurant.
I'm just thinking that comes an opportunity to fill the room with an event, and 14 of your seats are outdoors.
and that ultimately becomes the problem, is that, you know, for an instance like that, even without the outdoor seating, you know, there could be a change interior,
correct.
and that we wouldn't know unless, you know, it was observed.
The site plan approval is for 151 or 152 seats.
Yep.
Corresponding with the available parking, and we went through quite a bit of discussion on that back
Absolutely,
in the day. And this request proposes no change in the total number of seats. It proposes a change in the distribution of those seats.
Right.
So my question, I have a question here. So what's the parking situation there? Can it accommodate 3 more or parking spots?
The number of seats they have is
151?
exactly, I mean, like we've been saying, this is very tightly
Tight.
dealt with, and it's, the number of parking spaces is what determines the number of seats they can have.
Okay.
And even then, it was,
And it was,
Yeah, we had,
even with the bylaw as it stands with the number of seats per parking spots, there's been occasions that I've heard of that there is a demand for more parking spots than there really, are at any given time on some of the busy nights. But that's outside of, us making a determination tonight. It's just,
Right,
for,
right. Again, we're not
Conversation
increasing
point.
the number of seats.
yes.
right.
We're just redistributing them.
And my line of thought on that was, is there a different solution wherein we just add, if there is a request for approval for adding 14 more seats, as long as parking situation is handled, this is something the business owner can manage between the various seasons. So that should not be,
Yeah.
You don't need to have this back and forth again and again.
We're unable to do that, unfortunately.
No, under the existing site plan approval, the owner is responsible for limiting the total number of seats to the 151 or 152
Right.
number.
Yeah.
And as Joe pointed out, in principle, in theory, the owner could not abide by that by adding additional seats inside. But the burden is on the owner to limit the total number of seating to what was approved. And with all the discussion that we had back when the site plan was first approved about parking versus the available seating, I think we pretty much reached an understanding that the seating capacity that was allowed, the 150 some number, is the maximum that could be accommodated by the available parking. And we're not, no one's proposing to change the parking. I think reflecting on the discussion we had, there was no feasible opportunity for increasing in parking.
Correct.
So I think it's hard and fast that the approval is for that many seats. The distribution of the seats is the only thing that's at question here.
Right.
And I think given that the total number of seats isn't changing, this seems like a minor modification to me.
I believe I would agree.
yeah, this isn't a hearing, but are you gonna see if anybody wants to say anything?
Yeah, if anybody else has a comment on this.
Do you think it might impact, like minor modification might impact other businesses to pursue something similar?
In what way?
If we are allowing something which is a modification to the bylaws, it's even minor. I'm just thinking out loud. Will there be any other businesses which might?
It's not a modification of the bylaw, it's a modification of the way the approval for this
Right.
particular project is written. On the other hand, you'll hear me talk about this, everything we do establishes some sort of precedent that in the future, other people will look back and, gradually, things.
That was my point actually.
Yes, if we were making some kind of an exception or allowing some kind of deviation from, say, the parking requirements, that would get us into more of these, these potential precedent-setting issues. Here, really, the only thing at issue is where the seats are located on the premises. It's not how many seats there are.
In the interest of going home tonight,
Oh, it's a little early to be that doom and gloom.
well, but no, I have to look forward,
Well-
gotta think through the whole evening.
Yes, we don't want this particular discussion to
Last until 10
last
o'clock.
until 8
yeah.
o'clock.
My sense is that, we're gonna find that the swap, under the terms that have been discussed, is gonna be okay. The question is whether anything more is needed, the building inspector's letter or anything else before we, should do something about this.
So, I mean, that becomes a question as far as egress signage, as well as then verifying that there's safe entry. It's the same thing, you know, we approve conceptual floor plans very often, and then it comes down to that in order to utilize a space, the applicants have to review that material with the building department in order to make sure that necessary code requirements are complied with. That may even mean that maybe there's no logical place for a sign to be installed and that they don't get approval for it.
But we don't have to get more, to deal with that. Our decision could be just, you gotta be sure you cover those.
Correct. That's how I view it.
And I think in any case, the applicant or the property owner, the business owner is responsible for complying with all applicable laws and regulations.
Absolutely.
This
And
is-
we're not
this is-
changing the egress at all. We're adding tables outside, but the planter boxes are still at the same location. So the travel path is the exact same.
Except I could jump over the planters, but not over the tables.
Well, they're up against the window, so it's actually not
okay.
up against the
Yeah,
planter
yeah, you're
boxes.
right, you're right. Although who knows, nice weather, you might.
So what,
We often don't even do a decision, we just make a decision and communicate it.
Right, so we would need a motion, a vote of the board to identify that it's a minor modification, that it does not represent a substantial change compared to the original material considered by the board in granting site plan approval.
So moved.
second,
Moved and seconded that the board find this to be a minor modification and all the other words that Joe just spoke.
We got it on tape.
It's all on tape.
okay,
Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously.
And did that also say that we thought it was okay, besides it's a minor modification?
Yes,
Did it?
yes.
All right, good.
Thank you. Is there any
Okay.
delay in the decision from the board, or?
What I'll do is be providing a letter to the building department for that.
Terrific. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. All right, it is,
You don't need to, I'll put it in mine.
Yeah.
To be disposed of file.
good. It is 7:30 plus a little bit, and we have altogether 3 public meetings / hearings. The first one on our list is a request for definitive plan approval, Meadowbrook Manor subdivision.
So, do you mind if I offer just taking one item out of order because we have a requested continuance for the
Sure,
writings?
let's dispose of that continuation right away. That would be hearing B. Request for definitive plan approval, the Riding subdivision, 88 Adams Road.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I'm James Tatro from Thompson Liston Associates. We are the engineers and surveyors for the ridings. And I'm here because the plaintiff suggested that I should come before you. We're requesting a continuance, but to give you an update as to the status of things, because it has been some time since we were last in front of you, and we're asking for a continuance to yet sometime further out. So since I was last in front of you, we filed with the Conservation Commission a notice of intent. We had one hearing in front of them, got some feedback from them and from the abutters, and they asked for a check to bring on board a reviewer of the wetlands. That's now been done. He's on board. He went out to the site, asked for some more wetland flags to be hung. We had just immediately hung the ones closest to any activity. He asked for all of them, so that's being done now. We are in that process with the Conservation Commission. We filed with the Westboro Planning Board a application for definitive subdivision approval. We're going to be in front of them on July 16th. We're about to file with the Westboro Conservation Commission. And so I know it's been it's time since we were in front of you, but there is nothing happening. It's things are going forward on multiple other fronts. And again, I just wanted to give you an update at the suggestion of the planner because it had been some time.
And your request for a continuation is to August 26th.
That is
which
correct.
I would gather is what you expect to be sufficient time to deal with the other things that you're currently working
With the Conservation Commission activity specifically. And in the interim, I guess we would expect that at some point, probably the planner in Westboro, Mr. Robbins, and your planner, Mr. Layden, would have some discussions just to iron out any potential issues with the town crossing. They're not utility connections really across the two lines, but there especially are timing and sequence and phasing issues to be discussed because from both sides, 500 feet, there are the allowable dead end length in each town's subdivision rules really doesn't get you anything. Both sides need the main road, Stetson Road, to go through and connect to Harvest Way in Westboro from Adams Road in Grafton. And so both, and in addition, the earthwork balance, actually, the two sides need each other also, because there's a big surplus of material on the hill in Westboro, which is needed on the east side of the proposed wetland crossing in Grafton. So neither side alone works, and there has to be some coordination of timing and sequence. Again, that's been a bit of the discussion with both towns, also both conservation commissions. We were informally in front of the Westboro Conservation Commission. But there, I guess I just want to assure you that things are going on, despite my not having appeared back in front of you again.
And I did on Thursday talk to Jim Robbins, the planner in Westboro, and we did identify questions as far as earth movement, all those things. What are our local bylaws have as far as standard provisions regarding earth movement, and I was going to give him an update after we had this meeting as far as what we're looking at for a timetable. So I do regularly talk to the Westboro planner on multiple projects. This is just one of them, and I expect that we would be in advance of having a continued hearing on August 26th, ironing out any sort of issues that would present a problem from Grafton's perspective for this.
Any other questions
Chairman?
from the board?
No questions?
In that case, I will note that we have actually a two-part request before us. One is to continue this hearing to August 26th. The other is to extend the decision deadline for approval of the definitive plan to September 26th.
Correct.
Both dates are subject to additional continuation should that turn out to be necessary. But this is what the applicant is requesting, and
So moved.
I think
Motion would be to,
motion would be in order to grant
yes.
both
Grant.
written requests.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board grant the applicant's written request to continue the public hearing to August 26th of this year and to extend the decision deadline to September 26th of this year. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, sorry.
All right.
That's one.
That's something we can, and hopefully.
There, and now we're ahead of schedule.
Yes. Well, yeah, I'm hoping that item A, the Meadowbrook Manor, can also be taken care of fairly quickly.
I have a nit on the decision.
So we did continue the hearing.
Okay.
So we have
Yeah, so
Oh,
this,
yeah.
this is a continuation
Yes.
of a public hearing.
and is Andy here? No. Okay, I wasn't sure if he was going to be. Okay.
Okay.
I seem to
So-
recall that
Yep.
the applicant at least had let us know in advance
Yes.
that he would not be available
Yes.
for the hearing. So as I recall, we kept this open for one reason and one reason only, and that was
Correct.
to get documentation from the fire department regarding the ability of Ladder One to access the property.
So we did receive communication, however, a little less detailed than what we wanted. We did in the office talk to Steve Charest as well as provide him revised plans. What you have as Exhibit 22 is email conversation between us as far as how to try to resolve and this issue. And his comment was regarding my question as far as whether or not this was a no-go or whether we can condition access. He had stated, yes, it is a go with a condition we try Tower 1 again before paving is done. So I equated paving as being done as before binder being down, because then gravel base, if you needed, you could regrade things. I added in the draft decision a second inspection following binder just to make sure that things were still fine, because you could always that binder. But this was a piece of information we kept it open to, so we can then receive this, and then if the board wants to.
Should it just be binder, or should it be after all the paving is done?
We can add a third for verification, because realistically, once you come in with binder, you're going to know how much, and then that extra inch and a half
If,
should be okay.
you might say, if the fire department indicates that they're needed.
Yeah.
Because after the, after the
Yeah.
previous one, they may be happy.
So, do we want to keep the hearing open, review the draft, or?
I think we can close the hearing and proceed.
Yeah, at this point, if the only point of further discussion is the certain details of the conditions, we have,
Yeah.
we have no additional documentation or information that we're going to receive.
I move we close the hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded that this hearing be closed. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously?
I think it's, are we the only three that can vote?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. So,
So, and that's where my memo to the board identified everyone can participate. It's just
Only a vote.
only the three of you can vote. So,
And all three of us have to vote yes,
Yes, that's
Yep.
true.
yes,
don't we?
Yes.
we do.
You have to have 3 yes votes, no matter what your quorum situation is.
Okay. There is
Some
a
judge
mistake.
decide.
if you're looking at unless you're looking at what was just posted at 6:30.
I don't think this would have been changed.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, under findings, number 9, section 3.321, project lotting plan.
Yeah.
That's not an appropriate word. Lotting has a completely different meaning. Lotting means that is where you divide objects up into lots for auction.
Oh, been watching,
Well, no, I know that to be true. It's an old word. It's where you're actually dividing things up. It would be really project lot plan. Lotting is, if it's in there, they're wrong. English-wise, they're wrong.
What is the chance that a very technical document such as subdivision rules and regulations
Could be
produced
wrong.
by engineers, board members, planners is wrong? What's the
Not that I,
100%.
not that I happen to love the language
The
and sort of do
FYI,
crossword puzzles all the time.
the subdivision rules and regulations do not use the word lotting.
correct?
Lotting, it means actually dividing a group of objects into lots for sale.
And
So my recommendation is deleting the word lotting and just say project plan and existing conditions plan.
Perfect.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just looking
Okay.
at the,
And then that also is in the next section waivers.
Is it? Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I take it that the typo I found is no longer there. I don't even remember where it was.
I took between some of the ones David had and then actually
Okay,
unhiding, which was odd that it was even hidden, all the grammatical and spelling. I'm like, why aren't there any squiggly lines?
Yeah, there's one I
Not
found
that
that's
great of a
gone now.
typist.
Yeah, I thought, I was a little bit surprised that there were no squiggly lines when I was viewing it.
Yeah.
Then I clicked on the spelling, the spelling button under review, and it went through the whole document. And
Yep.
found a bunch of stuff.
So those were all corrected. Bob emailed me with a question as far as the correct reference, and where do I have it, for subdivision rules and regulations. I think it is correct as written, Bob, in that it is the title sheet having a separate date that really should not have that. But like we discussed, we should be probably revisiting some of the subdivision rules anyways, and then we can correct that.
Yeah, I noticed, there's a little, well, I noticed the date on the subdivision rules that he was talking about was 10 years ago. That's the last time there was a change.
Wow.
And usually you need to make adjustments in that time period. But that got me going to look at, see if that really was the date. And I saw there's this odd thing on the title page that there's another, a few days later, date at the bottom that doesn't seem to make sense. So when we're, working on the rules, maybe we can improve that.
Yes.
So I did add findings regarding the truck approach and all of that. So 4 and 5 are referenced regarding exhibit 22 that we just discussed. And then coming in at condition D, that's the
14.
last one, 14. A second site inspection shall occur prior to the final paving of the road to verify ground clearance. We just talked about basically saying fire department may, at their choosing, choose to re-inspect following final paving. We can add something like that, at least giving notice, if that's the board's inclination.
Any other comments or observations or suggested changes to the decision?
No.
Now, I don't have your script for the motion.
Let me put it this way. The chair would recognize a motion to find favorably on findings 1 through 13 to grant the requested waivers, to approve the application for approval of a definitive subdivision plan with conditions A1 through 13, B1 through 3, C1 through 7, D1 through 14, E1 and 2, F1, G1, all as drafted with the corrections noted during this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously, or I should say carried by a vote of 3 in favor. All 3 of the eligible voters voted in favor.
That's done.
All righty.
Done with that one. Moving on. The one that everybody's here for. The continuation of the public hearing on the request for special permit and site plan approval at 41 Church and 14 West Streets, Brigade Village. So where are we at with this one now?
Hopefully at the close, Mr. Chairman. Nice seeing everybody again. Nice to see we have the new board members. I'd like to welcome the, I might as well introduce myself. Wayne Bellick, WDA Design Group. I'm here with Dave Brossi of Brigade Village LLC. Again, nice to see you folks again. And I'd like to welcome the new members to the board.
I just want to Joe, explain the status or how the new members fit into this.
Okay, so for new members as well as for people in attendance and for the cable watching public. The project at 41 Church Street comes under the residential multifamily bylaw. That's a special permit. requires a special permit by the planning board. And as such, special permits require supermajority. 4 out of 5 members need to vote in the affirmative. As we were working through our hearing process through April and May, we came up to the town election. That town election saw 1 member not seek re-election, so therefore she was not eligible to participate, bringing us down to 4 members. A second regular planning board member took employment outside of Massachusetts and submitted his resignation. So that's another full-time member that was ineligible, bringing us basically to 4 if we included the associate planning board member. That associate planning board member then also withdrew, and he was not eligible. Following the election, we had a write-in candidate. Prabhu here was successful write-in, so he's now on the board. And then the June 11th Board of Selectmen meeting, the planning board and Board of Selectmen had voted to appoint both Justin and Vikram to the other 2 seats of the planning board, bring us to our full contingent of 5 regular planning board members and 6. As such, because only 3 remained eligible and impaneled to take action, we had to re-advertise. That re-advertisement basically resets the clock for all planning board members that are now impaneled to participate. We do have a lot of information, and the applicant is just going to give a review as far as how the plan has progressed so that the current board members can be brought up to speed and work through this application.
So I think it would be fair to say that we are in essence restarting the public hearing review process for this, but incorporating all the information and testimony that it was previously submitted into this new process.
So, and new planning board members have been provided links to the past hearings so that at least they can review. All the material that has been submitted is also on the planning department's website as it continues to be updated with new information coming in from the applicants.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I can do a presentation. I can make it brief, but provide enough information.
I think that would be helpful for
And I'll
the
do
newer
it.
members of the board.
Sure. And I'll do an existing conditions and proposed conditions. Now, a couple ways I can do that is just so the new board members see it. I could use my laser pointer when I'm discussing areas of the site and just point to the screen on this wall, or however you folks want to do it. Doesn't matter to me. Does that work for you folks?
If you 2 gentlemen can see that screen, that
Of course, plan B is to sit there and do it.
Well, that's a good idea. Once again, Wayne Bellick, WDA Design Group. So, for the new members, we had, prior to our submittal of the application earlier this year, we had a number of joint meetings with Joe and town staff, typical of what we do discussing the project. We had, a couple years ago, had come before the board to seek their endorsement of an approval not required plan. And the intent of that was, if you look at, it doesn't work with the laser pointer. If you look at number 10 Church Street, where Joe is going to identify, not Church Street, South Street, which is the white mansion at the top of the hill. That, at one point in time, that property was connected all the way down to Church Street through a couple parcels of land. Mr. Barassi had bought that land and the mansion property, as well as the area down to the site where the proposed spur road is, through a couple processes with the planning board, had a couple approval not required plans endorsed and recorded. Since then, since that time, he had also bought number 13 West Street, which is located, as Joe is showing, with the first 6 units on the right-hand side as you enter the site. Mr. Brasi has also purchased number 15, though it's not part of the project. It is to remain an existing single-family dwelling. So basically, the site is located, as was indicated, in the RMF district and the R40 zone district. The RMF being to the westerly portion of the site, and the R40 to the easterly portion. The site measures about 9 acres total. Of that 9 acres, about 7 acres is located in the RMF zone district. The topography on site, the frontage on the property, it has about 240 feet along Church Street and about 20 feet along West Street at the end of West Street. The topography on the property ranges in elevation from, if you look at the Loop Drive, the angle point in that lot line, from that elevation in there, it's about elevation 490. And as you move along the drumlin, which is somewhat of a ridge line northerly on the property, to the church driveway, the garage driveway, that descends to elevation 450. So for about a 40-foot grade change. As you move to the east toward the wetland system, that elevation in there is about a 460, so about 30 feet lower than the highest point on site. And if you go to the extreme southwest corner, the elevation down there is about elevation 380. That's a grade change of about 110 feet. Topography on the site along that drumlin is about 5 to 10%, gentle to moderate topography. And then to either side, as it breaks east and west, it increases in slope to about 10 to 15%, which would be a moderate topography. As you get into within 150 feet of Church Street to the west, those slopes increase to upwards of 30%. So that basically describes the topography on the property. As I said, there was a wetland system located on site, which is located on the easterly side. Beyond that, further east is an upland area that will remain undeveloped. The vegetation on site is primarily hardwoods. There are some evergreens on site. In terms of the utilities serving the site, along West Street, there's existing sewer and water. The sewer is an 8-inch sewer main, and the water main is a 6-inch main. The proposed development calls for the creation of 57 market rate residential rental units distributed among 11 buildings. Each building will contain anywhere between 3 and 6 units, 3 and 6 units, and they're about a 2-story building. Each building will be equipped or provided with a single bay car garage with a parking space on the outside, and throughout the development we're proposing additional visitor parking spaces. The bylaw calls for 2 spaces per unit plus another quarter space per unit for visitors, so 2 1/4 spaces per unit. This is providing 2.3 spaces per unit. The driveway configuration comes in at the end of the pavement off of West Street and continues into the site a distance of about 1,000 feet to the point at where it loops around back on itself with the emergency vehicle access. We are proposing that emergency vehicle access at this time, which measures about 160 feet in length, be constructed of grass pavers. We have discussed with the planning board and have presented on the original site plans the alternate to that, which would be a full paved access drive to finish the connection. In addition to that, we have at about 400 feet in, 385 feet in, along that loop drive, we have a spur drive that comes off of that. That's about 350 feet in length, and that terminates with a T turnaround at the very end. As I said, when we did meet with Joe and town staff Included in those meetings was the fire chief. We had discussed with him vehicle movements on the site. As part of the site plan submittal, we had provided some maneuver plans demonstrating that their large ladder can maneuver throughout the site, and we've made provisions for that. One of the things that we looked at originally when we were doing our design was 6 units coming in and off of Church Street. That particular area would have resulted in a 30-foot cut. As we looked at it, it seemed that it really didn't make sense in the end. 30-foot cut. We had some geotech work done down there to analyze that slope because of the cut. And we decided at that point, after meeting with Joe and the town's peer review consultant, Graves Engineering, represented by Jeff Walsh, that we may want to reconsider moving everything up into the site. So we had done that, and that's what you currently see here. In terms of the grading that is being proposed, we have mimicked the grading on site to pretty much match the existing hydrology, so that in terms of what flows from the site during current conditions, the general drainage patterns will still be maintained. As we came into the site, we had come in at a 6%, 6 to 7% grade, which is the existing grade of the existing Church, West Street, as you come up from Church Street. We looked at coming in at a steeper grade of 4%, but as we looked at that, one of the things, or a lesser grade of 4%, one of the things that we looked at was trying to balance the cuts and fills on the site. So we're moving, if I recall, about 20,000 yards of material on site for this project. Yet, of that 20,000 yards, and we looked at it from a surface to surface. When we do a more defined review of the site, when it comes down to pricing it out for construction, we look at the cuts for the foundations and all that. But based on the initial earthwork analysis, we've come up with about an import of about 800 cubic yards of import required for the site. We hadn't taken into account the trenches for the drains, for the sewer manholes, for the foundations, and we feel that once we take that into account, the numbers will be closer to a net zero in terms of import to the site. This is important, as if you have a site that requires a lot of export or a lot of import, it wreaks havoc with the town roads. We will be coordinating with the town when we get to the point where any activity occurs out here. The project is going to be subject to a stormwater pollution prevention plan, a SWIP. As part of that, because we are altering more than 1 acre of land, it requires a NIPIDs permit, which is a national pollutant elimination discharge system permit with the EPA. So we've prepared the SWIP, and once a contractor is hired, we're going to complete that SWIP, and we can provide that to the town. As part of the permitting process, so let's go back to drainage. So drainage is going to be collected in deep sump hooded catch basins, routed through stormwater treatment units to provide for the required total suspended solids, or TSS, removal rates required by the state. Those will discharge to stormwater basins. When we had initially designed the basins, the soils out here are mapped hydrologic soil group C. It's a dense soil. There are some folks here in the audience that work for the federal government and clearly know their soils, and had made some presentations and had raised some comments about the soils on site. So we recognize that while classified as a C sub D soil, it's a dense soil, and that, the infiltration rate, we're required under the state regulations to infiltrate in these soils to the maximum extent practicable. So that was part of the original design. We have modified the design in terms of stormwater and provided that information to Graves Engineering, which they have signed off, as has the Conservation Commission as of last Tuesday night, when they closed the public hearing and we drafted the order of conditions, as well as close out the process for the stormwater permit. As part of our drainage design, there are 3 basins. You will note that to the west side of the site, there are two basins, D Basin 1 and 2. Over to the east side, behind the buildings, we have Detention Basin 3. That detention basin, since we started the process, has morphed into a gravel wetland detention basin. So if you look on the northerly end of that basin, it's pretty interesting design. And this came as a result of discussions with the Conservation Commission, as their chair is pretty well versed in these types of basins. The intent of the basin is not only to remove total suspended solids, but it takes up the pollutants that make its way through the system with the vegetation in that basin before discharging to the wetlands. So the water is, not only is it treated with the removal of the total suspended solids, but it is cleaner as it makes its way to the basins. Sewer on site is going to be handled through a gravity system. So essentially, looking at the spur drive, the sewer main will run to the north to the intersection of the loop drive, and then continue out to West Street, where it's going to connect to an existing sewer manhole at the end of West Street. And within the westerly side of the site along the loop, the two buildings to the left will be picked up by a gravity sewer that is going to come to the intersection at the end of that emergency vehicle access. And that would, again, all be gravity. Water on site, what we are proposing is there's a 6-inch main, as I said earlier, out in West Street. We're looking to upgrade that to an 8-inch main to serve the site. Each building will be provided with a single fire suppression line in one gravity sewer line, while each of the units will receive their own domestic water services. Vegetation on site, we had through the planning board, working with the board, there were a lot of great comments raised regarding screening around the site, as well as comments raised by the abutters. We had provided a planting plan, which I know Mr. Hassinger appreciated, having served on the board for a number of years and not having seen that quality of plan. We had our landscape architect, our resident landscape architect, in to make that presentation. And what we found is, as we walked around the perimeter, it required a little bit of enhancement. So that was what we had done. We had come in that presentation and made some proposals as to what we were doing. During the public hearing process, it was clear that Mrs. Hassinger was very partial to rhododendrons, and we wanted to honor that by along the back of the spur road propose some rhododendrons. So I believe overall that, okay, if you wanted to, Joe, if you want to hold to that phasing plan for a second. Joe, are these the most recently revised plans that oh no, this is the original site set?
No, these are May
Okay.
17th.
Okay, if we could just scroll up one sheet, Joe, to the there you go. So as part of the process, when work begins, we need to look at the site and make preparations for erosion and sediment control. In meeting with the Conservation Commission, it was discussed that there would not be more than 5 acres opened at one time and earth moved on an area greater than 5 acres. So we created 2 phases, phases 1 and 2, that are roughly about 3 acres and 4 acres in size. Basically, the way this works is the contractor will go in, do the tree cutting. Our surveyors will stake out the limit of clearing for them in accordance with the approved plans. Once the trees are cut and felled, we will go in and stake out the erosion and sediment control barriers. Those will be the hay bales and silt fences. Those will then get installed. After those are installed, he will look to make provisions for stormwater, so create his sediment basins, and then identify areas that we feel are going to, after he grubs the area, stumps and grubs it, then we will look at where we need to site some of these diversion channels to ensure that things operate properly. During construction, most sites, as you folks know, require construction trailers. Construction sailors, that's good. I was just at the USS Constitution this weekend, don't mind me.
With the wetlands, it might work.
It might work very well. So I don't think the Constitution would fit in this one though. But he has the luxury where he had purchased number 13 to have the existing house and a garage. So his plan would be, in lieu of a construction trailer, he would use the existing house as a construction office and the garage to store supplies. For instance, some of the replacement hay bales and silt fence and erosion control measures. Long and short is, if those get wet, they're of no value if they're left out in the rain for extended periods of time. So the way this works is all these measures get employed. He begins to do his work under the stormwater pollution prevention plan. He is required to have inspections along the site. An individual will be designated to do that. We're currently doing it at a site. So it occurs, I believe, I'd have to look at the SWPPP, but once every couple of weeks, I believe, is required, and once after rain falls in excess of a half an inch. So for instance, tomorrow we've got a site, an active site, where we're doing the same thing. So that's what we would be doing up here as well. That would be the erosion sediment control plan. He does, like I said, he has staging and storage areas for his equipment. There will be a loam stockpile area, and that will be surrounded by a silt fence around. So that will be, with the exception of the opening to that from which they will draw their material. I believe that covers it, unless that's, I can get into, if, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like. Now that I kind of have the board up to speed, I'll leave it to you as to whether or not you would like the board to ask questions specific to this, or if you would like me to continue with the presentation as a result of where we left off at the last meeting and where we are today.
Any questions at this point? Recognizing that we're, the sort of the next part of the discussion will be to pick up where we last left off and bring us up to date on what's happened since the last time we met. But
So, and if I can just ask, as far as the intentions with that, because the last thing we left off with was the traffic. Will you then give an overview as far as what we did for the traffic to
I
then
will.
pick up where we left off?
You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
I had a bunch of questions and
Okay.
so
Welcome.
thank you. I'll ask my questions and then you guys can tell me if it's part of the subsequent conversation, and then we can park.
Okay.
The questions I had is there in your, can we go back to the other chart where they had the 11 buildings?
Okay.
that came?
I'm just pulling up the concept plan.
Yes. I didn't get my glasses, so I cannot refer to the paper, so that's better. So the questions I had, one was, is there a play area for the kids? It's for the residential units. That was one question. Before you answer that, so I'll ask my questions, and then, as I requested, you can tell me this is already factored in as part of the subsequent discussion or not. The second one was, are we expecting school bus to come inside the property, right into the community and back, or the kids are supposed to walk over to the West Street and for the school bus to pick up? I'm looking from that perspective. The same applies to a trash truck pickup. Is it going to come in right into the property, or is it going to be at end of West Street or somewhere? Are we expecting the residents to go and drop off trash there?
So you do realize that you're dealing with somebody with very little memory retention here, right? If I could, would you mind, Mr. Chairman, if I answered the
It'll
question?
help us too. It'll remind us too.
yes, yes, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Feel
So
free.
obviously
Let's
he's younger than me.
questions one at a time.
Yeah, so with
just make it
respect
easy.
to,
Play
so I
area
guess,
was my first question.
yeah, so I think that the question was whether or not there's like a dedicated tot lot on the site.
Right.
In terms of tot lots, we haven't dedicated a tot lot on the site, but in terms of the unoccupied open space on the site, there is over 60% of that, and most of it is basically the side yards, the backyards, So there is, you know, we do have some stormwater basins in the backyards, but for the most part, that's what we're looking at is, that unoccupied space. And with respect to the residents, these are 2-bedroom units, right, Dave? So what Dave has found is for the most part, they're young professionals, empty nesters with his residents that come in here. So that's basically what we're looking at here. The other question was with respect to, for any school-age children with buses. Buses are not allowed to go onto private properties. So in this particular case, they will be picked up and dropped off at the intersection of West Street and Church Street where that currently occurs. And as part of the presentation in a few minutes, as we get into the traffic, I'll explain what's going on down there as well.
What would be the distance from the intersection of Church Street and West Street to the other end of the property here?
So if from the intersection of West Street to Church Street, I believe, is about 350 feet to the end of the existing West Street. And then as it picks up, it's about another 385, let's call it 400, then another 350 to the very southern unit. I think that's what you're looking at at the T turnaround. Would be about, I'm guessing about
720 feet.
Yeah.
The total, all of that totaled up to like 1,000?
About that, 750, 800, 1,000. I don't know if it's quite 1,000, because that's
Yeah, you'd
350,
probably be looking around 900 feet total.
800, 1,000, 900. So then, with respect to the question about rubbish removal, curbside pickup. So what I failed to mention to the new members is Mr. Barassi owns the Hillview Estates down on Providence Road, just down gradient of the Highfields development. That was a project that we had worked on back in 2001, which I'm sure Mr. Hassinger remembers. And hopefully, years down the road, you guys will have that legacy as well. But we had worked on that, like I said, it was about 2001 when we had gone through permitting. And he owns those units, well-maintained. He's got great residents. So that's what he's looking to do here as well.
I'll address your regarding rubbish. Because this is a privately owned property, there won't be any trash pickup in it. What we did over at Blackberry and Juniper and continue to do is originally we were gonna have dumpsters there, but I'm not particularly, I don't care for the look of dumpsters, and it made a lot more sense to have a curbside pickup, so each person gets a trash receptacle and a recycling receptacle. And they put it out on a specific day, whatever day the recycling and trash company tells us. They put it at the end of their driveway, and the trash pickup comes through, and then the recycling truck usually comes through every other week, or sometimes it's every week. So there won't be any unsightly mess of dumpsters or anything like that there. It's all inside. We insist that it stays inside their garage until trash day. Then they can roll it out, it gets picked up, and it has to go back in.
Yeah, so in that sense, although in your case, the trash and recycling pickup is privately contracted by you,
Yes, yes, sir.
but operationally it works very much like it does for single-family residences in Grafton, where we have the town pickup.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
it sounds like the way you described it works the same way. It's privately contracted, however.
Yes, sir.
Except there are no green bags you have to buy at the store.
No green bags, thank God.
Yeah, I think the residents here might be happy about
Yeah,
that.
that's a selling point, I gotta tell you.
No, our residents are very happy about it. If I may, your question about child play areas, because we already have a project that's very similar to this, I can tell you that 99.9% of the time is the children play on, all these homes have the deck. So the children usually play on the deck. It's easier for mom or dad to keep an eye on them because there's railings going around. If they want to put a child thing, they can do that, or right off of the deck if the child really wants to be on the lawn. So we've had no issues at all about child play areas, or it's never even come up in conversation with any of our residents. Just to clarify that.
Do you have any additional, next question, Prabhu?
Yes, sir.
You really haven't run out of questions quite yet.
No, so I made a note of a few of those questions. I guess when you talk about the traffic piece, you might address it. So 57 units, roughly about 250, 240 residents, all included, I'm assuming 4 per unit. Is West Street wide enough or from a traffic perspective? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So would West Street, does West Street need to be expanded to accommodate for the traffic? That's one.
Funny you should ask that.
Yeah.
I think you'll, I
We'll
think
be getting
we'll
to that.
address that.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Actually, what I did fail to mention is that the road width on West Street is 24 feet, down near the intersection of, from the intersection of Church Street as you head south on West Street. There's a red house down there, and it's at about the red house where it tapers in as you're looking up West Street into the site on the left-hand side. So what we would be looking to do is make those improvements to widen that so it's a uniform 24-foot width all the way in. And
So that'll be
24
one
feet,
in and one out lane.
12-foot wide each way,
12.
which is more than enough for that volume of traffic.
And the last question, and 2 other questions. One was, there is only one exit out of this property.
That's correct.
Is it, I don't know what's the bylaws or safety concern, whatever it is. Is it fair to expect at least 2 exits out of the property, or is one good enough?
No, there isn't any expectation to have 2 exits out of the property.
Okay.
We had cited, so under the subdivision rules and regulations, there is, the maximum cul-de-sac length
Okay.
is 500 feet. What we had done is provided, if you look at where that emergency vehicle access comes out and rejoins the loop road, that is less than 500 feet from the centerline intersection of West Street and Church Street. So the intent was to keep that less than the 500 feet and loop it back onto the loop road prior to exiting.
Also to
Mr.
provide,
Hassinger brought that up at one point at a couple of hearings ago as well.
and to provide a little bit of backstory, when Wayne had mentioned that he had met for a few months with town staff prior to submitting the application, one of the initial versions we saw was what would occur to the Church Street side if you had access, and basically coming back and zigzagging back and forth like we were that street in San Francisco. And it was quickly identified by staff, including the fire department, that that wasn't a reasonable access to get that second means of egress. That the disturbance that was going to be done to the side of the slope, while it would be a compliant grade, you were looking at close to 8% zigzagging through to make it up. And that's when we encouraged the applicant to start to look at this type of provision with internal circulation to avoid that. It is desirable to have 2 means of access. It is called for as far as in the subdivision rules and regs to prevent excessively long dead-end streets. In this instance, that concept plan was quickly identified by staff as not being a good option, that just gaining that access, the amount of drainage, the impact as far as trees, screening in that area would have been essentially cleared out in order to accommodate the grading that was going to be necessary to accommodate that.
But this is one of my concerns that over all the years that I've been on the board. Rules say 500 feet, and the way you measure it is to the furthest point. And in this case, you'd start at Church Street and measure, and I don't know, depending on exactly what that so-called emergency access does, it's either all the way, it's all the way to the end of the one that goes north, south, or all the way around to that emergency exit. And that's a lot more than 500 feet. It's a concern. The rule is 500. There have been a considerable number of times when the board has allowed a little more, up to about 600 in certain circumstances. Generally, we've looked at it as needing some sort of substantial public benefit, to justify that. When it gets to 800 or 900 feet or whatever it is, that's getting to be a lot, and it's hard to justify. That's one of my concerns, and it brings in one of my concerns about, I'm not sure whether we finally settled this emergency exit versus it being a connected road, an actual road that connects back through. So that is an area of concern.
And Mr. Hassinger, there was a, that concern that you raised about it being the grass pavers versus pavement. We have, as part of the process and looking for a condition of the decision, would look to incorporate the board's wishes as to what you would want. And we heard you. We understand your concern.
Right. I recall when we had some discussions about the pros and cons. But I some of your access question, if you can make the loop around that, then it helps a little bit. There are good many units on that loop. So anyway, we'll probably talk about that some more.
Yep, much appreciated. And as I said earlier, we did run the fire apparatus through the site quite comfortably, and it was approved by the fire chief when he reviewed it.
Yeah,
My last question, I promise.
No, go ahead.
In terms of snow removal.
Yep.
I have lived in similar communities, and that's where most of these questions come in. I lived in a place where there was no play area, no nothing, and we had to. I get the piece for parents preferring children to be on the deck, so they are under watchful eyes. Kids don't prefer to stay on the deck; they prefer to run around. And when they ran around, my kids ran around. They went into the woods, and every time there were tick bites and so on and so forth. And that's one of the reasons when we moved to Grafton, it was heaven and hell difference for us. We moved from Amherst. So very different perspective. I also factor within that all my questions that children, if they have to walk 800 feet, 900 feet to get onto a school bus, that's quite some distance in freezing weather. So that's one part. Trash part, you addressed that it is going to be curbside. So that's really great. That's helpful. Snow removal, if you could throw some light on what's the snow removal.
Sure. So snow removal will be typical in what Mr. Barassi does over at Hillview as well. It's typical. We've had this discussion. In fact, the last time I think it came up, I think Joe was at the last meeting with town staff and the police chief. And a question had come up about snow removal. And as David said to the DPW director, we'll probably be there before you guys do out at West Street. And it came up specific to West Street. And Dave's comment was he will hear from his residents if he doesn't have it cleaned very first thing. So they will go out there, they'll do it. Typically, it's basically the plows come in and the material is cast on either side of the road. On sites like this, if we have an outrageous winter like we've had over the last few years, if it is not manageable, it will be removed and properly disposed of from the site.
We've only had to do that twice over Blackberry and Juniper. We brought in literally a front end loader, scooped up all the snow, we trucked it off site.
Yeah.
So we're prepared to do that if it gets that bad, and that's what we've done in the past.
I did have a related question to the snow removal and that grass pavers. Is that going to be plowed year round if it is grass pavers? I
Yes.
say year round, but
It
I'm
does
saying
have to
every snowfall.
Yes, it is, and that would be part of, the operation and maintenance plan. So I've done this elsewhere where I've had grass pavers, and the way we have set it up, I have a couple sites where it's simple as a couple of bollards, as we've shown on this plan, on either side, should the board go that way, on either side of the emergency vehicle access at each end, where there's a chain that is connected in a small placard, emergency vehicle access or something, or emergency use only. During the wintertime, it is plowed. And the way that is done is, on a couple of sites that I have done, the maintenance company will stake with wooden stakes the limits, and then they'll keep the stakes in all winter, and then they'll come through and plow that area. They'll come through, they lift the blade. So when you put in these grass paver honeycomb systems, the honeycomb is probably about an inch or so deep, and they'll fill it maybe 3/4 with loam, and then they'll seed it. And the reason they do that is so that when it rains, the water is held in the cells and allows them to flourish, allows the seed to flourish. And so they come through and they just leave the blade up just a hair. So basically, they just leave a little bit of a crunchy surface, an inch or two of crunchy surface.
And does that mean we will not be doing any sort of salting on that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that particular area is fairly flat.
Yes. That's all for me at the moment.
Any other question? I know you were going to get into the traffic a little bit.
Yes. So as part of the, and I don't know if the board has gone through this with the new members, but as you know, the town has Graves Engineering as their peer review consultant. They had hired MDM, who does traffic assessments and peer review consulting for a number of communities, to review the assessment that our firm that was hired by Mr. Barassi, Tetra Tech, had performed. Long and short of it, when all was said and done, the analysis that was done, Tetra Tech identified areas in town that would be impacted by the traffic from the site, and provided traffic counts, and as part of that had also done some site observations, monitoring traffic speeds, vehicle trips per day. They had gone out on Easter Sunday because of the church to see what type of activity occurred out there during that day. And when all was said and done, the town's peer review consultant, MDM, reviewed the project and concurred with everything that they had presented in their report. The only issue that really came up of concern is, Joe, if we could go to an existing conditions, maybe the aerial, so that the new members could take a look at that intersection. So as you can see at that intersection, along the westerly side of Church Street, West Street, there is a bituminous concrete sidewalk. That sidewalk goes along that frontage of the church, goes down to the intersection of West Street, right into a utility pole, and terminates. So right there you see the utility pole, and like I said, it could not be more smack dab in the middle of that sidewalk if it tried to. So the way it's configured, as you can see, that crosswalk goes diagonally through the intersection. Now that's a pre-existing situation, okay? It doesn't conform with the ADA or the MAAB, the 527 CMR, which is the state regulations governing accessible routes and accessibility, as it basically, I think it's like 40 some odd feet in length. So when you have somebody with needs that get into that condition, they're out in the roadway for a longer period of time than they should. So we looked at a few options where we had posted signage, maintained that crosswalk, had proposed landing strips at either end of the crosswalk with detectable warning strips. The detectable warning strips, I'm sure you folks have seen them. They look like a Lego. Okay, so we had that configuration. We had another one that went to the east side of the intersection, so that the crosswalk came off the sidewalk from West Street, went across West Street, and then went north along that easterly side of the intersection. But what we ran into there is, because of the property line for the town, some of the improvements of the paved surface are actually located on that lot. So we were pretty much restricted with the configuration, and the best configuration that the traffic consultants came up with, the representatives from the developer and the town, was a configuration where if a wheelchair had gone across that intersection in that configuration, and he went to turn to go north across Church Street, unfortunately he would be out in the path of traffic. So that clearly didn't work. So the other condition we looked at is what you see here. So that condition would be a realignment of the sidewalk, as you come down the sidewalk from the site, realigning it around the utility pole to a striped crosswalk that then goes over to the north side of Church Street. That particular location, again, there are property line constraints, so what they would need to do in order to make that a complying turn for maneuvering, they are modifying the curb by a foot or so to allow for that landing strip and that turning movement to occur, then to go easterly to across West Street on the northerly side of Church to pick up that sidewalk, and that sidewalk is going to undergo a minor modification. Now, when we were at the last board meeting, this had gone on for quite a while. We had, I don't know how many discussions, how many conference calls, how many meetings to discuss this intersection. And what they came up with was one of Mr. Hassinger's favorite designs, which was pretty much this configuration in a four-way stop condition. So I remember he was thrilled to see that, and and when I was, I echoed his sentiments. I didn't say it out loud in front of the traffic consultants, but I kind of echoed his sentiments. Looking at,
Actually, you did.
did I? So when I saw that, basically, Mr. Hassinger's point was, if you're coming up Church Street and he's looking at winter conditions, if you're coming up Church Street and forced to stop, and then you have to regain to get going. If you have a situation where the weather conditions are pretty poor, you're going nowhere. You're not going to go anywhere unless you have a four-wheel drive vehicle. Likewise, coming down Church Street, as you come to that stop, if you don't prepare in time, you're going through the intersection anyway. So, what we decided to do, as was discussed with the board, we had a meeting on the 28th of May where we had the traffic consultant, the town's peer review consultant, DPW director, a representative from the Board of Selectmen, the police chief, and Mr. Barassi and myself. I think that was pretty much it. And we had discussed it. And Chief Crapo, your police chief, echoed the same sentiments as Mr. Hassinger, probably as aggressive as Mr. Hassinger's.
You say as?
Yes,
Oh.
which was pretty aggressive. So, and I'm purely going on my recollection in the video.
We'll look at that.
So I had, so we heard his concerns, and we told him that was the position of Mr. Hassinger, and he said there will not be a four-way stop at that location. So what we have proposed, and everybody was in agreement. In fact, there was a discussion of this, Mr. Hassinger, if you remember, and members of the board, when we, at the last meeting, when they were talking about the advanced warning flashing beacons. So we have the flashing beacons in advance of, so as you're coming down the hill, as you can see, they'll all be solar powered. So as you're coming down the hill, it will show what the travel speed should be, what the speed limit is, and it will post your speed. So as a motorist, you see that and it says, hey, I know I do this. If I see one of those things go off, even if it's not in a school zone, when school's not in session, and a good example was the school here in Millbury. I came down in Grafton. I came down Millbury Street on my way to this meeting, flashing. My instinct is to go to 20. There's nobody around. Okay, so I decelerated to about 70, and then I continued through. And so with that, I think when so that will be the first warning. The next signage that you're going to have is a warning ahead that there's a pedestrian in the area. And then the last one will be right at the crosswalk itself, which is, I believe that's also a flashing beacon indicating that there's a crosswalk. So that's what they had come up with. We think it's a good design. We know that the board is probably, bless you, more in favor of that than what was previously proposed, and
That's
certainly,
duplicated on both sides.
yes. Yes, so it's coming up Church Street and then coming down Church Street, giving advanced warning of that situation. And like I said, if you could take a look at that existing striping, just a basic triangle, the hypotenuse goes right through that intersection. It's the longest leg, and it's just a lot of time for somebody to be out there. You really don't think about it, but when you see it on the ground, that's
And that's the part where the school buses would stop?
I'm not exactly sure where they stop, but I do know that they stop at that intersection.
I can't imagine that they'd actually want to come into West Street and try to turn around. My guess is, although it's not going to be spelled out anywhere, that the kids would probably be waiting in the church parking lot.
Yep.
Or at least the parents parked in the car in the church
Right,
parking
that's-
lot.
yeah. I don't think I'd worry about the kids getting cold. Not nowadays. Parents drive them right down to the bus stop and sit
There's
and
a
wait.
couple of large parking areas there because there's a Catholic church there.
Yeah, it's parking lot over here.
So I think one of the concerns that was raised during the discussions when MDM made their presentation, they had indicated, as the board members know, I know Joe certainly knows, that along the west side of West Street, alongside the church, the Bitconk curbing is painted yellow. And MDM thought, well, perhaps that was intended as, there it is, as to indicate no parking to the side of the street. So I did, after hearing comments raised by the board, comments raised by MDM. So one of the concerns from the peer review traffic consultant was what happens when a fire truck goes to make that turn? And if you look at a fire truck, when you look at the geometry, how narrow Church Street is, which is good from a traffic calming measure. If Church Street was, 50% its width, and you come through that intersection, you're going to blow through that intersection because you're on the Autobahn. You think you're on the Autobahn. Because of the width of Church Street, it's very narrow. It's traffic calming, a good traffic calming road. So as you come down that hill, it tells you it's narrow for a reason as a motorist. Likewise, when you look at entering onto West Street, when you have a fire truck coming up Church Street or coming down Church Street and making its maneuver to come onto West Street, it really cannot afford to have vehicles in its path. I know I've talked to a number of fire chiefs that say because of the size of the vehicle, I don't care what's in my path, we're getting through. But again, obviously, we don't want that damage to the Grafton beast that you guys have in town, known throughout a number of communities. It's a big animal. The request of MDM was, let's see what we can do about restricting the part, and I think you folks recall that component of the discussion, restricting parking in that particular area. So I reached out to Father LeBlanc at St. Philip's to have a discussion with him, show him the vehicle movements, the turning movements that we had submitted as part of our application, as well as the exhibit that we had on the crosswalk, just to show him basically an existing condition of an area where the fire apparatus needs all that pavement to make that maneuver. So I met with he and some folks from his board. I met with Father Leo LeBlanc, Lisa Stewart, who I believe is the treasurer, though I'm not sure, and a gentleman, Peter Cardoza. We met at the site on Friday morning, spoke with them about what the request was, and explained to them that it could be easily accomplished within 100 feet of the intersection, coming up West Street and going up Church Street from the intersection, that simple no parking signs mounted on a U-channel type post, which is the same as you have for the stop sign, that would be placed right at the edge of the lawn at the back of the sidewalk, and they're totally amenable to it. I believe, Joe, did he reach out to you today?
Gave a call and Natalia took the message that supported the proposal.
Okay.
So I'll be following up with him tomorrow.
Okay. He said that he would be calling. I said, I just want you to, you know, if you're on board with this, if you could just convey that to the town. So that was the purpose of his call, today.
That'll be no parking signs on the town road.
At the back of sidewalk, yes. And on Church Street as well.
So I think the selectmen are the ones who actually have to say, you know, agree with that.
Yeah. I think on West Street, because it's a private street, I think we discussed that at our meeting with MDM. And I don't believe that required a selectman vote because it was on the
That is
private
a
way.
private street. West Street is a private street, so the rules are slightly different there.
So they say. Doesn't look all that private.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think it's marked private, is it?
I don't think so.
No,
and
no.
I believe the town does plow it.
It is not marked.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
So that's where we are with the traffic. And that's where we are tonight. So
Any other questions about traffic?
if I could as well, if before we get there. So again, we closed with Concom last week, as you folks know, is because we were within their jurisdiction, we had to, and because of the stormwater system administered through the Conservation Commission, we closed with them and got our approvals from them last Tuesday night.
Anything else you wanted to bring up as far as anything else that's happened since the last meeting? I noticed there was a geotechnical report.
Yes, and before we get there, there was a comment letter from Graves Engineering to the planning board and to, if I could, Mr. Chairman, just touch on that.
Please do.
As well. So in response to the letter from Graves Engineering, what we wanted to do was close out last Tuesday night with conservation. So the sheets that were affected by their comments, we had provided via email to the town, to the Conservation Commission, and to Joe. And basically, the only comments that they had, actually, comment one, I thought was addressed, it was not, but we could have that addressed as a condition of the board's approval. It was comment one of the zoning bylaw, which indicates that the impervious area percentage needs to be reflected on the plan in accordance with the zoning bylaw. Comment seven, the outlet pipes of the subsurface detention system to the northwest corner of the site had a shallow concentrated stormwater discharge onto the abutter's property. Joe, would you happen to have an electronic version of the plans recently submitted, the 4 sheets?
So that is one of those things that, and why I had asked for identifying what needed to be part of the exhibit list, because that sheet, while I have the email that was sent to Leah, that is not on our exhibit list, so we need to add that.
Okay. If you would like to, Joe, to go to the May issuance set of drawings, I can show you what we had done.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward. So this particular issue was a concern of Graves Engineering. We had, as part of our design on the grading plan, I think it's most evident, when we did the design for the drainage, Joe, if you could zoom into over near the church's garage, that area. So what we had proposed in that particular location was a subsurface detention basin. And basically what that was, or what that is, are storm tech chambers, those plastic arch type chambers wrapped in a 40 mil polyethylene liner underground, and on the down gradient side of that is a small couple foot tall, 3 foot tall, or 4 foot tall actually, retaining wall. What we proposed was the discharge pipe for that would discharge to the north of the retaining wall between the property line and the retaining wall in what's called a level spreader. It's basically just a level hole in the ground. And the thought would be that once it discharges in there and it starts to fill, it'll slowly cascade over the top to mimic the existing conditions hydrology. So Mr. Walsh at Graves Engineering had a concern with that it would result in a shallow concentrated flow, a more eroding type of stormwater flow. So he suggested tying it into the drainage system in Church and West Street, which I failed to mention as well. If you could zoom out for a second, Joe, just to tie the whole thing together, outward. So one of the residents, number 13 West Street, when we were out at the site at one point, a gentleman came out, Mr. Tom Winston, had come out and indicated to Mr. Brasi that he had a drainage issue on his property and that it surcharged and the water came up and then flooded the back of the yard where the Red House is. So we were out there on a day where it was not raining, and we decided to go out there on a day that it was raining. Well, certainly, sure enough, Mr. Winston was absolutely right. It was a nightmarish situation. So Mr. Brasi said, I've got to fix this. Let me get in touch with this guy. This isn't right. Not his problem, but he volunteered to fix this guy's problem. And so basically what he is proposing in there is the current situation is there's a 10-inch PVC pipe that is pretty much, if this is the ground surface right here, the pipe is right here. So once the water comes through there, the pipe fills up, it just overtops and makes a mess of the area. So what Mr. Brasi has volunteered to do was install a drop inlet. The situation today is trash gets into that pipe and clogs it. That pipe system is interconnected into the catch basins. Those catch basins should not have interconnected pipes. The purpose of the catch basin is to collect stormwater and any silt that gets down through these paved areas, hold the silt in the basin. Well, because they're interconnected, what's happening currently is the water hits that basin, churns up the silts, takes it down to the next basin because it's interconnected, and continues to take that downstream to the down gradient wetlands on Church Street and cause the wetlands to be filled with silts. So what Mr. Brasi just volunteered to do was install that drop inlet to provide for more capacity, put a larger pipe, but rather than a 10-inch pipe, he's putting in a 12-inch pipe, but he's putting it down lower in the ground. And on our details, we show that there's a concrete drop inlet being proposed with a trash cage on it and an open grate on the top to allow for additional inlet capacity so it doesn't create that flooding situation. That will go out to a manhole out in West Street, which will connect to the existing manhole at the intersection of Church Street. He's also picking up the catch basins in Church Street, which are now interconnected. He's righting a wrong, and he's taking that and he's piping it into his new system. I bring that up because as we were talking to Jeff Walsh from Graves Engineering, and he discussed where we want to send this water, what we had done is we had taken the pipe that was originally coming out into the level spreader just up gradient of that church driveway and the church garage, and we are now proposing a drain manhole out in the site access drive to pick up the overflow from the underground detention and then piping it into our new drainage system and taking it downstream. In talking with Jeff about the capacity of the system, as Jeff says, and I agree, the water is currently getting into that storm drainage system today, so it should not be an issue. So that addresses his number 7. Like I said, the plans, we have provided those, and my regrets that you don't have them with you tonight, but they have been finalized and approved by the Conservation Commission as part of the stormwater report. The next comment that he had raised was number 17, which was that the model of the HydroCAD software that runs a simulation of the of the stormwater was not consistent with the plans. We did make that modification to that, one of those 4 sheets that was submitted. Next comment was number 22, general engineering, the erosion sediment control plan. We had a leader that showed a call out that didn't quite connect to an erosion sediment control line that was modified, and that was it. So at this, I'm sorry.
What?
So at this point, you know, in terms of what was required, and from the Conservation Commission has been addressed with respect to the stormwater, with respect to the planning board. I know that we do have some waivers, that we have requested that need, a vote. I think there's that discussion about the emergency vehicle access and how the board wants to, address that. And then I think, you know, with the intersection, I think, I haven't heard anything from the board as to what their preference is, but it seems like the police chief and those folks, MDM, are very happy with that design. So we actually feel that we're in a, we have nothing left to present, and we feel we're pretty much there.
Okay, so
My
anybody on the board have any questions at this point?
my only question on the number 7 with the stormwater things is, have we heard anything from the Grafton Highway Department in regards to their, willingness as far as accepting the drainage into the town systems?
So the drainage currently goes into the town systems. So from the existing conditions, and based on what we saw in the field during a couple good rain events, the basins are collecting a lot of that stormwater runoff that is currently leaving the site. The way the site, when it drains, as you folks know, as you come up around the turn on Church Street and you're approaching that West Street intersection, that whole hill comes down into the street drainage system. The area, pretty much on West Street, and the residences on West Street, in the watershed tributary to that area, are currently going through the catch basins. If the inlet of that catch basin, that first catch basin, can't take it, what's happening is it's going down to the next one. So as Jeff says, it's making its way to the system anyway, so it's able to handle it.
Anything else from the board?
Just comment 35 about the location of the hydrants. Do we need to do anything more?
Ultimately, what would happen is that final placement, once they start with construction, we have site coordination meetings,
Okay.
fire department, and all those things. We review final sets.
Get done then, not
Yep.
at decision time here. I wonder if anybody else?
If there's nothing else from the board at this point, I would like to, first of all, thank the members of the public for their patience as we bring our new board members up to speed. And at this time, offer you the opportunity to step up to the podium and ask any questions or make any comments that you might have. Mr. Valone.
Deep breath. That was a long presentation, and I might be equally as long. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Daniel Vallone, V-E-L-L-O-N-E. I reside at 51 Church Street, and a budding landowner. Before I address the intent of what I wanted to cover tonight, I did want to refer back to the new board members' question about school busing. Joe, if you could put up the conceptual site plan, please. So it was discussed that from access at Church Street to one of the furthest most units at the end of that dead-end street is plus or minus 900 feet. Just to put that in context, right, a mile is 5,280 feet. So what we're talking about is roughly a fifth of a mile, plus or minus. And if you look at the site development plan, there are no sidewalks proposed. Okay. Now, having said that, I think Wayne had made the comment that we all know the parents are going to drive the kids to the church parking lot. But at the last board meeting where the traffic consultants were here, Joe queued up the aerial image, if you can go to Google Earth and show the parking lot of the church where it says that's for private use only, because I think the other board members might be interested in that. So I don't think that is a responsible default to assume that parents are going to be using the church's private lot for that purpose. It's already been established that we're talking about roughly 1/5 of a mile that potentially occupant kids are going to have to walk without any sidewalks. Also, just to go back to a comment Wayne made earlier in terms of play areas for the kids, he suggested they could play in the detention basins, which I want to point out, and that's on the record, right? I want to point out that to the east, it's a wetlands, and the two detention basins that are to the west of the proposed development that abut Church Street are between 3 to 7 feet deep, as has been documented in the plans. So I don't know that that is, again, a responsible play area for kids to play in, a pool of water 7 feet deep, unsupervised by their parents. However, that's not why I'm here tonight. Those are only the things I picked up as I'm sitting here listening as you are. Wayne started out with providing just a little bit of history, and I'd like to do the same. Joe, if I could trouble you to go to C102, drawing sheet 102. And I apologize. Before I do that, I have an ethical disclosure statement I have to read. As noted during prior public meetings, for the purposes of ethical disclosure, I'm the Northeast Regional Geologist for the United States Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources Conservation Service. However, the comments that I am offering to the board and have previously offered to the board have been submitted as an abutting resident with deeded access to the common driveway on Churchill Condominium 3, immediately abutting the proposed development. The findings and conclusions pertaining to the Brigatti development at 41 Church Street are my personal professional opinion and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or U.S. government determination or policy. The interpretation of soil conditions which exist on the proposed site are based on over 20 years of professional practice, licensure as a board-certified professional geologist, and graduate degree in civil engineering, concentrating in geohydrology and geotechnical engineering. So I've satisfied that obligation of the government. The reason I've asked Joe to queue up, I think it should be C102, which is the existing conditions plan. Yes, almost. Yeah, there we go. If I just may approach the screen, just for the clarity of the new board members. So just south of what's on the screen here, here's Church Street located to the left, and then just south of this, Joe, if you could show my property, it'd be appreciated. That's what I'm trying to illustrate here. A little more south. There we go. So this is Churchill Condominium 3. Here is the driveway to Churchill Condominium 3. I reside at Churchill Condominium 2, which is there, and I have deeded access to that common driveway for Churchill Condominium 3, so we're immediately abutting that property. If we could stay on this figure for a minute, as Wayne previously noted, he had made reference to an audience member who has knowledge of soils. That is myself that Wayne was referring to. I spent 15 years in the private sector before coming to the government. I did what Wayne is doing now. I presented in front of planning boards. I conducted stormwater inspections, which Wayne mentioned they're going to retain a consultant to do that work. So I did that for about 15 years before coming to the government. I've been with the government for 7 years now, and in my capacity, I manage the geology program throughout the 7 Northeast states, and I look at submittals from engineering consultants on a daily basis, right? So this is kind of what I do every day. I'm professionally licensed in 7 states to practice the profession of geology. My undergraduate degree is in geology, my master's degree is in geotechnical engineering, my postgraduate work is in geological engineering. So I feel I'm pretty qualified to look at this stuff. So having said all that, I have some concerns that I would like to raise tonight. For starters, it's been referenced several times this evening that the Conservation Commission has approved the applicant's plan with regard to stormwater. And I just want to be very clear that that is entirely separate from what we're discussing this evening. Because what the Conservation Commission is tasked with is making sure that the water is managed responsibly. The reason that is separate is because and I'm referring to Exhibit 39, which is the Graves Engineering letter. There's a note here that the post-development hydrology computations addendum dated May 24th regarding the exclusion of the exfiltration from basins 1 and 2. So to provide that history or that historical context, I had submitted a rather lengthy submittal, Exhibit 28, which outlines some concerns with the proposed location of stormwater detention basins 1 and 2, which are located to the western extent of the property. And if you look at this polygon here, this triangle right there, that's soil unit 350C, and as it turns out, that soil unit is the least favorable soil unit for the purposes of infiltrating water, which is what these basins were intended to do. In fact, in the, bear with me 1 minute. In Exhibit 6, the Stormwater Management Report, it classifies the sediment basins as exfiltration basins. That's on report page 3, which is PDF page 5 of 134. Further, it goes on to say that the design will infiltrate runoff to approximate existing groundwater recharge, which is stated on report page 4, PDF page 6 of 134, and that groundwater is recharged and provided within the stormwater detention basins. So that is supported by the design calculations, and that was based on what's known as a hydrologic soil group C. Now, as has been documented in the Graves Engineering Report, and as Wayne has already alluded to earlier, it was because I had raised those concerns previously that those soils were unfavorable for the location of the detention basin that the applicant's engineer went back and looked at the exclusion of that infiltration from basins 1 and 2. So the applicant has been, and you'll see the date there is May 24th, that post-development computations are dated. The last board meeting, planning board meeting was May 20th, the date of my letter. So they went and they tweaked their computations after our discussion at the board meeting, which is appreciated. So as a result of now removing the infiltration or the exfiltration from the basins to the groundwater, the Concom is satisfied. But that doesn't alter the fact that there are significant engineering concerns with these stormwater detention basins designs, as I will outline now. So for starters, I want to just point out that the geotechnical engineering report, which is posted as submittal number 40, thank you, is technically not in compliance with 250 CMR, the Massachusetts regulations, which basically state that a registrant shall sign, date, and seal instruments of service prepared by the registrant when those documents are filed with public authorities. So you guys are elected to your positions, you represent the town, you are public authorities. That report has been submitted to you guys. It hasn't been sealed, and therefore it's not in compliance with state law. So prior to making any determination on that document, I would encourage you guys to request that the applicant's engineer submit a document that is not in violation of the law. Now, having said that, there are still significant concerns with their report. For starters, let's go back to what Wayne discussed earlier this evening. In providing the summary of the site, he indicated that there was a balance of cut and fill of 20,000 cubic yards. Then he went on to say that there was 800 cubic yards of import material that would be required. And having that volume of material leave the site would wreak havoc with town roads. I wrote that down. As a result, they came up with a net zero cut and fill balance. Okay. However, if you read Exhibit 40, the consultant's report, it says specifically that off-site processed gravel fill is recommended for use as structural fill within the proposed slope area of where a raised grade is proposed. The off-site processed gravel fill could be well graded, blah, 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 I'll skip to the important stuff, with no more than 10% passing the number 200 sieve. Okay, so that's really fine stuff. That's fine particles. That's page 5 of the geotechnical report. If you look at the gradation results, the particle size distribution that's attached to that report, you'll see the last category there, percents fines, and It sums them up, silts and clays, because they didn't do the analysis method to differentiate whether they're silt or clay. But there's 3 lab results that are presented here. We have 25.9% fines, we have 36.8% fines, and 42.6% fines. So all of those exceed that 10% of structural fill that is outlined in this geotechnical engineering report. So I don't think it's realistic to say that we're going to have a net zero cut and fill balance on that site, because in Exhibit 40, it goes on to say that fills ranging up to about 13 feet from existing grade will be required to reach the proposed finished slopes. So how are we going to fill 13 feet with unsuitable material? There's more related to that in terms of the engineering analysis, but we'll get to that in a minute. So in any event, I think there's a discrepancy there in what you're being presented tonight in terms of a verbal explanation of the project and what's actually documented in the engineering report. So I don't think those cut and fills are balanced. I'm going to go on to point out that before I forget, we discussed comment 17 within Graves' engineering report and how the Concom was satisfied. But I want to just point out to the board that that relates specifically to detention basin 4, doesn't address detention basins 1 and 2, which is what I am principally focused upon. So now with the context of detention basin 1 and 2, we already know they're located in unfavorable soils. And I have documented that to nauseam as Exhibit 28. I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. And the applicant has already addressed the fact that they're now not going to exfiltrate into the groundwater. That poses a problem because in the geotechnical report, it says specifically that according to WDA, the basins are designed to infiltrate collected stormwater into the underlying soils. That was a design assumption that those waters would infiltrate. If those basins no longer infiltrate that water, that means we're maintaining a permanent pool. And what elevation will we maintain that permanent pool at? So that's concern. It says in the report the proposed basins range from about 3 feet to 7 feet in depth, but that is based upon that exfiltration of water to recharge groundwater. We already know that the soils are not suitable to recharge groundwater. And we already know that the applicant has modified their submittal to the Concom to now no longer count the fact that we're going to exfiltrate. Right? That's what they said here in their May 24th submittal, the exclusion of exfiltration from basins 1 and 2. So now in our analysis that the applicant is submitting, they're not considering exfiltration. The soils are not suitable for exfiltration. We have to pond all that water. We have to store it someplace. So now there's an issue with that in terms of some of the design assumptions that are included in this report. Specifically, this report outlines on page 4 that the depth of groundwater below the existing surface was measured on 3 different dates, and those depths of groundwater are between 3.2 and 3.8 feet below the ground surface. But this is what's known as a static groundwater elevation, meaning that over time, as this consultant has gone out and measured at these 3 specific instances, groundwater was somewhere between 3 and 4 feet below ground. Now, that is not what is defined as the seasonal high groundwater level, which is what was discussed in detail in Exhibit 28 with regard to the suitability of the soils. So this is just an instantaneous snapshot in time between 3 and 4 feet below ground surface, okay? At seasonal high groundwater, which we discuss in this submittal as being inches below existing ground surface, where is that water going to go? Now, in the consultant's report, Northeast Geotechnical, Exhibit 40 on page 5, they go on to say that infiltrating stormwater at the top of the slope increases the potential for saturated ground conditions and possible breakout along the proposed slope surface. So what the consultant is documenting here is that if the water doesn't exfiltrate, it has to go someplace. It's going to seep out of the side of these detention basins. And that's just a known given condition. They're stating that as this is something that could possibly happen. And that has not been adequately addressed. Now, there are more concerns with this report. And that is the fact that if you look at Exhibit 40, the consultant has not actually included any of their engineering analysis. Now, for the board's consideration, I printed off one copy of several different documents, of 5 different documents, and I scanned them in advance to make it easier because I know there was problems scanning stuff in the past, and I'm happy to email it to the board. But what these documents represent is they represent common state of the practice in the allied professions of engineering geology, what I do, and geotechnical engineering, what these guys do. Because there's a fine line when you're analyzing soil conditions between what is geology and what is engineering. So there's several design documents here. One is from the Department of Agriculture, the agency that I work for. One is the Army Corps of Engineers on slope stability. One is from NAVFAC on soil mechanics. One is from the FHWA in terms of design properties for embankments for highways. They do a lot of good work. And what all of these documents talk about, these 4, talk about a minimum safety factor for stability of 1.5. Now, if you read the Northeast Geotechnical Report, it says in here that the results of our slope stability analysis indicate an adequate factor of safety of 1.3 against slope failure. But they don't substantiate why they consider 1.3 to be adequate when industry convention is 1.5. Now, I know what you're saying. You're probably skeptical, like I would be, and say, well, those are specific to those 4 agencies, and those are all federal agencies, right? So I got this paper for you. This is published by the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, in 1992. And the title of the paper is Factor of Safety 1.5, Is It Appropriate for Embankment Design? And what this these authors, there's a couple authors, what they say is factor of safety of 1.5 has been practically codified as the generally accepted minimum allowable factor of safety for embankment design. It's right there. So the question is, why is this engineering consultant using 1.3 and not using the accepted 1.5? But wait, there's more. That is only the static stability analysis. Now, a static stability analysis is like, it's like when a football receiver catches the football, right? And he catches the football and he's standing still. He can hold that football all day long until a linebacker blindsides him and crushes him with a dynamic force. So that dynamic force in an engineering sense is called a pseudostatic stability analysis, or applying a seismic earthquake design load, in which case that would have a factor of safety of 1.1 as the minimum threshold. This report does not analyze for pseudostatic conditions, which is curious, right? So we have an existing natural slope, which Wayne reported earlier to the western extent of the property, roughly 150 feet from off of the bounds of Church Street. We have a 30% natural slope. The rest of the site is 10 to 15% in slope. So we have 30 to 10% slope varying at that western extent. That's okay, I don't need those anymore. And then we're going to place 13 feet of fill above natural grade, right? We're using a minimum level of factor of safety that hasn't been substantiated. And then attached to this, there are no engineering analyses. Now, it's customary in engineering practice, and I'm just going to go to my agency's document real quick. It says, documentation should include analysis program and methods used, input data, and tabular and graphical output. And then it goes on to talk about some of the nuance of what data should be provided. It also then goes on to talk later on, it says, clearly document the reasons for not analyzing a condition. So all we have in this geotechnical report, which is unstamped by a PE, is one analysis condition, a static stability analysis, not pseudostatic. It doesn't factor the fact that now we're not exfiltrating, we're going to maintain a pool elevation, which may daylight at some point outside of the slope, and we should just accept that, and there's no seismic loading conditions. And on top of that, just take our word for it, we haven't provided you with any of the input design parameters or any of the output analysis. All of this is a big red flag, and in my professional capacity, when I get something like this, it's kicked back with a lot of red ink. I have put a lot of red ink on this page, such as materials, properties used in analysis, verification of these parameters during construction. The consultant says right here that off-site gravel is going to be used. Who's going to verify that we're not reusing on-site soils, since the applicant has already documented here tonight that their intent is to balance cut and fills and reuse soils with 25 to 46% fines, right? We can't do that for a 13-foot high fill prior to building an embankment on top of that that is going to impound water. You're just going to lose your stability. But don't take my word for it. Ask the consultant to model those conditions, because the consultant has outlined several different materials here. In their general subsurface conditions, they've outlined natural topsoil. Now that's going to be stripped away. That's well documented. But there's a natural subsoil and there's natural glacial till. There's boulders or bedrock which were encountered. The consultant's not clear. They've identified it as one or the other. So right there, that's 4 different soil layers, including the engineered fill. None of that has been modeled here. So Graves Engineering, as the town's peer reviewer, cannot first off, they should not ethically review this because it's not stamped by a PE, but they cannot adequately review this to state of the practice conditions because it's not here. The information's not here. Okay. So now I know what the board is going to say because they've told me this before. Document everything, all of your concerns in writing, and submit it to us, which I'm happy to do, but please all be mindful that my time is equally as valuable as your time, and I receive no compensation to do this the way Wayne gets compensated on behalf of the applicant, and I have not volunteered my time as all of you have, but you are getting 20 years, over 20 years of professional practice experience for the town's benefit. There are significant red flags here, and I am only scratching the surface because this document was posted June 24th, today's date. So I've spent an hour-ish from the time that I left my office till this evening to look at these things, and readily these things are jumping out at me. So what I am urging all of you in your best judgment, and maybe Wayne's already thinking continuance in his head, is to not approve this until these questions are satisfied to the board's satisfaction. Because the analogy that I think in my mind, it's kind of like the woman who swallowed the spider to catch the fly, right? Graves Engineering is holding the applicant accountable for their engineering design. The board is holding Graves Engineering accountable for doing their due diligence, and the public is holding the board accountable to make sure you guys are doing everything you're supposed to be doing. All of this is on record. I'm happy to submit it all by writing again, even though I'm providing verbal testimony this evening. But the applicant's designers, right, the aggregate of them, needs to do their due diligence for the benefit of this project. And it has not been done yet, in my mind, in my professional judgment. I want to thank you all for hearing my spiel. I tried to keep it brief. And I'm happy to entertain questions pertaining to what I've presented on tonight.
So, if you may, just let me comment for the board. It's not included in the public record, though. In retrospect, it probably should be because it was something that was more ideal addressed to me as far as Graves' ability to peer review the material that was just stated. Jeff had replied to me saying the issues raised are not invalid. However, the issues raised go beyond standard engineering and land development practice in Massachusetts, and in my opinion, go into the level of detail perhaps practiced by scientists. Their office is not geotechnical engineers, so they don't have the knowledge base on staff to respond to your comments. They can only sort of look at things in our subdivision rules and regulations and basically stormwater guidelines, neither of which get into this level. So being a special permit, the board is able to request and have the applicant produce additional information to assist the board in evaluating projects. I personally am also not a geotechnical scientist. I can observe both a butter and the applicant's engineer go back and forth. I don't have the knowledge base or the skill to say what is, say, appropriate for complying with town and applicable development regulations and what is more of an ideal situation. The only way I think from our perspective to be able to evaluate that is to have the geotechnical report peer reviewed so that the board has confidence as far as is the information sufficient or is there additional information, but we need some sort of standard as far as evaluating is this relevant or not in the detail that I think is being requested of the board. The issues are more complex than what we typically deal with subdivision, and maybe that's just because we don't have educated abutter next to it sort of doing a peer review of the material anyways. But essentially, you know, the concern as far as the board knowing that drainage is a significant issue, that everyone is concerned about what happens if something gets built and all of a sudden you have drainage issues where water is going someplace that wasn't theorized. Graves doesn't have the skill set to adequately review with a stamp themselves the geotechnical report. So then we're looking elsewhere for evaluation to make sure that there's a level of confidence in approving that material. Or, you know, the only thing I have from Graves is basically saying to put in a condition that during construction they abide by the standards within the geotechnical report. But is there something else that's missing? Is there something else that needs to be done? I'm not entirely sure. And the reason why we ask things and for documentation is specifically because of this. I volunteer on a local board in my own town. I devote a lot of hours outside without compensation. This board does as well. For very complex issues, we can watch this tape over and over again, but if we're going to answer specific questions, look at specific details, we need it in writing. And that's just what we ask for every single applicant, recognizing that the time is not ideal that things get put online.
And Joe, if I may just say that I acknowledge that. It was simply a matter of limited time availability to be able to articulate all this in writing. In fact, I think it was the May 20th meeting, I gave a similar technical presentation and then followed it up, which again, I'm happy to do. The final thing I want to add is that this is not a witch hunt. And I've spoken with David and Wayne in the hallway after meetings on several occasions. My interest is to see this project be developed responsibly. And although I have a vested interest as an abutting landowner, I'll just point out for the remaining board's consideration, it's actually right here. There is a catch basin right there along Church Street. There's a catch basin, a utility pole, and then my driveway. And I've shared photographs of prior storm events with the applicant and with the board. The minimal volume of water that rolls down Church Street at this point that is captured by that catch basin. And so at this point, there's no fouling of my driveway. There's no fouling of the public right-of-way from water that is coming off of the proposed site development. My concern is that under worst case scenario, whatever storm event that we want to hypothetically consider, if these basins don't perform as designed, if they don't exfiltrate when we consider that as a component, or if now they retain that water, but we have a significant storm event and they overtop, that water will foul the public right-of-way along Church Street and my driveway as well, which is why I'm here. I have a vested interest in this project, but for the greater good of the traveling public along Church Street, there is a concern. And at this point, it is unclear from the engineering material that has been submitted that that concern has been adequately addressed in my professional judgment. I can make a recommendation to the board for a few different geotechnical firms. There are some highly reputable companies in Massachusetts, but for the sake of not biasing the town and potentially excluding those companies, I will not do so unless I'm specifically asked. But a Google search of very top reputable testing labs and engineering firms do exist right here in Massachusetts that would have the expertise to perform a peer review on behalf of the town.
Joe, were you talking about basically a complete peer review of the whole thing? I don't think that most of us have the expertise to judge whether it's needed. In other words, most of what comes before us, it's a good enough idea. I'm an engineer, I'm good, but we're going to be picking up our master's degrees on the way out of the room here from this discussion, having learned very little, quite frankly. There's far too much involved here for a lay board to decide whether this rises to where it's required. We're required to do. We have to do something, and that's my first. That may be less than whole peer review. Get advice on what we should do about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing before sort of continuing on that, just giving the applicant an opportunity to comment on that, and then also because we did receive other inquiry as far as a soil scientist, just to see if there's anyone else that has comments related to this, so that we can then sort of discuss it all together. I don't know if, because I'm seeing a little shaking of a head from someone in the audience, so it might be good to sort of grab everything together and then have a discussion.
I'm gonna make it now. It is 9:48. We have a rule on this board that when meetings go past 10 o'clock, we have to accept that. We have to vote to accept that. So I move that we extend the meeting beyond 10 o'clock.
Second.
It's not popular, believe me, but sometimes it's necessary.
How long is the extension?
Moved and seconded that this meeting be extend past 10 o'clock. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously.
We have setting a time.
Don't want people
There's a
coming
long
back.
history on this.
We'll work on it.
Yes,
Thank
I-
you again for the opportunity. I'll be happy to follow up in the next couple days with written comments.
Yeah, I think with your comments and with any other comments,
And
I'd like to make sure we
return.
receive as many comments as we can tonight. Off the top of my head, I'm gonna say that these don't sound like things that a quick answer will be sufficient for, so I think we'll want to, after we hear everything that everybody has to say tonight, we'll have to figure out a course of action to get everything properly addressed.
And I appreciate the board's position. For clarity, right, we're not fully down the rabbit hole on any of these issues, but we are getting into the weeds. And the reason I wanted to take your time and spend the time getting into those weeds is to simply impress upon you that in the literature for each of these different topics, right, because there was a prior submittal and now this evening and the submittal to follow, that there is substantial literature and accepted practice that supports these comments. Right. And so I think it's valuable that you're all taking the time to get into some of the nuance, because it's not a superficial minor tweak to someone wants to put a shed in their backyard. Like, this is heavy earthwork. This is, a lot of cubic yards of material that are going to be moved. It's a substantial amount of water. And right now it is a drumlin, and everything from that high elevation of 491 west drains naturally over wooded slope, right? A mature tree sucks up roughly 100 gallons of water a day, right? So think about, do the math, number of mature trees that are going to be clear cut for this development, and we're going to regrade that 30% slope, and we're going to build a 13-foot fill on top of it. all that water has to go somewhere. And the question is where and how. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Hello, good evening. I'm also not a fan of extending this meeting past 10 o'clock. I have to go to work at 7:30 tomorrow morning and leave my house at 6:30. So this isn't a stretch for me as well. I'm Linda Hutchins, to the new board members. I've not met you before. I'm a hydrologist by training with more than 30 years of experience. I'm also a licensed professional geologist and a certified floodplain manager, and I work for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, although I live here in Grafton, and I'm making my comments as a resident solely. I think what we're dealing with here with Graves Engineering, at this point, I didn't realize they didn't have geotechnical engineers, but they've also only been tasked by this planning board to review the information for stormwater and for site plan development regulations. I think we are outside of the realm of what they were asked to do professionally. But I do think this is highly necessary to do and do right, because this is very serious stuff. Some towns, I've done some research, some states and some towns have separate requirements for site development in steep slope areas like this, and they have setbacks for stormwater features on steep slopes like this to avoid this kind of situation that we're talking about. And maybe that's a little bit of a loophole in the town's regulations and the state's regulations, because I don't see that Massachusetts has these. I've done some research on that. So it's maybe something that we could introduce as a proposal to avoid this kind of situation in the future. So I also have had pretty little time to review this geotechnical engineering report that came in. And it introduced some questions for me as well, which I don't have any thought that we're going to resolve tonight. But some of my questions were, after reading the report, was how much soil are we talking about? How deep are they talking about excavating this soil? Was this what the developer envisioned? I'm not sure I saw this on the engineering plans that I've reviewed, and if it was there, it didn't jump out at me, quite honestly. So I don't know if this is a new wrinkle in the plan or if this was what they intended all along. But what did jump out at me is that the soil on that hillside is not suitable to be saturated and be stable. And, you know, I'll just present it much more simply than Dan. It's too steep, there's too much silt in the soil that's in the ground there to be able to stand this. So I believe what they're talking about is they're saying perched groundwater may be encountered during slope construction. That's the groundwater they've already observed 3 feet below the ground surface and maybe as high as inches, as Mr. Valone says. Exposed natural glacial till soils that are observed to become unstable in the presence of groundwater, that's, as far as I'm reading, all the soil I've seen tested here, should be excavated down to firm ground, and the resulting excavation should be backfilled with compacted lifts of off-site processed gravel fill. They go on further to say that you should have a geotechnical engineer in the field every minute of construction to make sure this is installed correctly. So it's that serious of needing to be done and to be done right, that they need one engineer in the field to observe that they're removing the soil, replacing the soil in 12-inch or 18-inch lifts, compacting it, every bit of it, before they add more, and truly stabilizing that 30% slope. So this is pretty serious engineering. Okay, also, I wanted to tell the new members that this area is mapped as a high slope or very high slope area in the town's 2016 hazard mitigation plan, and that it does represent a landslide hazard. And the high silt content really makes that soil want to flow. So that is kind of the nature of the problem. This is the first I've seen of these geotechnical testing results showing how high the percentages are. Also, I'd just like to point out that I'm not saying this as a FEMA representative, I'm just saying this as a town resident, but I think we need to consider liability issues if that hill were to slide. If we build this however we build it, and there's a big landslide on that hill because we've got stormwater detention ponds perched up there. FEMA would, in a presidentially declared declaration, would help the town fund cleanup of Church Street, the street itself, the town-owned street, but private property is on their own. So, big consequences, I think, for the developer as well, if this goes very badly. So let's think about liability. I support Mr. Vallone's concerns about the Churchill condominium driveway. I'm a former resident of that little development. And I really do think that the developer should extend those topography lines on the site plan around to show slope and how the drainage is going to work with respect to the neighboring properties that are downhill. And just, I guess, one more comment about sidewalks, public safety, school buses, snow removal, children walking 900 feet potentially to the bus stop with snowbanks. Everyone remember 2015, the snowbanks? I couldn't even shovel any higher physically. You don't have sidewalks. And then maybe at some point they have to cross Church Street to get to their school bus as it goes up or down the hill. Very concerned about the safety of anyone crossing Church Street, and really doubly concerned for anyone who's disabled trying to get across that street with the steep curve that goes on, and inability of cars to stop in the snow. So that's all I'm going to say, and thank you for your consideration tonight. And I do encourage you to get a peer review and some more details on the geotechnical evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
My name's Deborah George. I live at 63 Nottingham Road. I'm an abutting property. My degree is in design, so I'm actually going to talk about aesthetics. I personally oppose granting a special permit for this high-density project. One of the things they're asking for this special permit is some of the property is zoned for R40, which is supposed to be a very low density, and they're asking for a very high density. As Vice Chair Hassinger noted earlier, everything you do at this board, you set a precedent. I'm not sure that we want to set a precedent where we approve R40 for a high density. I'd also like to point out that R40 requires that you respect the existing character of neighboring homes and properties, and this proposed project will clear cut the two properties and construct 57 two-story apartment units. These two-story apartment units will sit much higher than the existing condos at Bruce Hollow. The views from the existing condos will just be of the sides, back sides, and back balconies of these attached apartments. So I really feel that the existing character of the neighboring condo development has not been taken into consideration, and the added noise and loss of privacy will be to the detriment of the homeowners within the existing condo development. I had requested some elevation views that would show the proposed two-story buildings at the higher elevation, how high they would sit, how much higher they would sit as compared to the current 1.5-story condos, which I haven't seen yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, again, thank you all for your patience and your comments, and thank the board too for, we've spent a good deal more time in this than we normally would, but that's really necessary for our 3 new members. So with all the concerns and potential issues that have been raised, Do you have anything you'd like to say at this point?
Yes, we do. Just a couple things, just for the benefit of the new members who, unlike the senior members, if you will, of the planning board.
You can call us up.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I get called. The experienced members of the board. Looking at stormwater basins, detention basins, just for the record, the removal of the exfiltration was discussed with our geotech, and he suggested that it would be a better condition if we could remove the exfiltration component from basins 1 and 2. Basin 3, we needed to remove it because we were proposing a gravel wetland. The other thing is, under the state stormwater regulations, we're required to recharge, and that's what we were looking to do to the greatest extent practicable. And that is based on these soils to the greatest extent practicable. I guess that the question I would have is in terms of the geotech report prepared by Northeast Geotech. They make recommendations about inspections. They make recommendations of gradation on the slopes. And our suggestion would be, and there was a comment by Mr. Valone about the document being in violation of 250 CMR because of its lack of a seal and signature. It would seem to me that that would be easily resolved by the geotech. I'm sure if he was that uneasy about the information he produced, he wouldn't have produced it. So if a seal and a signature is required on the document, I'm sure he would produce that. Secondly, within his report, it sounds like his suggestions, which I'm sure that the two individuals that spoke would agree, that he's making suggestions in his report for construction as to the gradation of the material to be provided and the inspections. So with that said, we would like to ask if the board would entertain a close of the public hearing and making those conditions of your decision, that an inspection be performed or it be witnessed by the geotechnical engineer during construction of these slopes, and that material be tested and installed in accordance with the geotech report.
I can't judge whether that's adequate to satisfy the concerns. That's why I feel I need some advice from people who.
Yeah, I think, I would say, I think consistent with what you just said, Bob, I think the board, given the geotechnical report just having been received, and given the issues raised by the commenters, I think at the very least the board needs to get some advice on how best to proceed with this. At this point, there have been questions and concerns raised, and some of those concerns may not be within this board's purview. Some of them may be valid concerns, but not within the generally accepted practices that would normally apply to projects of this type. Some of those concerns may be entirely legitimate and require some further documentation or detail on your part, some of which might be suitable for conditions in a permit. But with this many uncertainties right now, I do think that we need to look at getting some form of review and evaluation of everything that's been brought forward today and tonight.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. As a point of order, based on Robert's rules, the gentleman who had the floor made a direct request to the chair to make a determination. So it's now up to the chair, based upon Robert's Rules of Order, to acknowledge that request and put that request to a vote of the board. You can't just leave that out there, it wasn't a comment. And I appreciate the board's discussion, but the board has to acknowledge the gentleman's request.
Except that this board has not adopted Robert's rules as its legislative rule.
Right. Yeah, we do not strictly follow Robert's rules. We kind of do in some of the more commonly used aspects, but this is not the type of thing that the board takes as a request requiring immediate board action. We have historically not done that. We do understand that the applicant has suggested or requested that we consider doing that, but consistent with past practices, we do not immediately vote on such things. So any recommendations, Joe?
So, one, I mean, the request that came in from Wayne was to basically close and then to add in conditions. I myself, as the person that would be drafting, I do not necessarily know if the conditions that I'd be putting in are adequate and what needs to be done for ensuring compliance. Likewise, Graves Engineering has commented to me that they're not geotechnical specialists either, so I can't get any guidance as far as whether a specific condition is adequate. This is not anything in the last 20 years that I've been presented with this sort of challenge of a report that has had issues raised, and in my basic understanding, they don't seem like they're that different, but it's enough of a technically nuanced issue as far as a 1.3 versus a 1.5 that I have seen in construction sites the side of a slope let go, and dealing with essentially $1 million remediation of an abutter. I've seen that happen with a storm event. Knowing that then they just should have bought out the property owner in the first place before undergoing all that work. To have the geotechnical report itself just peer reviewed just to identify are these reasonable conditions, I think is something that may be warranted in this situation, because when we approve something, when we approve a decision, the board has to be confident that the material that's been submitted is adequate. Yes, the board can fall on the subdivision rules and regs and say we don't have any information on steep slopes, separation of drainage facilities from steep slopes. We don't address any of that in our subdivision rules and regs. And those are the engineering standards that the zoning bylaw refers to us to adopt. At the same time, special permit does give us a latitude to look at other things, not looking at other things as in the context of let's undertake a lunar landing project, but reviewing something to see is there something missing in here? Is there something that the town should be concerned about? Maybe a safer, granted, it may be a more a unforeseen step on the applicant side, but in the end, 4 out of 5 members of the planning board need to approve a decision. If there's open questions as far as how we're dealing with that, that could be a challenge for some of the board members as far as is the information that's before you enough to vote to support a project, or even if you if the project was not to be approved, do you have the information that the board is confident that would uphold a denial? Either way, you need solid information, and that I don't have from a peer review that gives me confidence from the geotechnical side.
Yes, I think what this comes down to is we need some some level of geotechnical peer review so that we can be satisfied that the applicant's geotechnical material is either acceptable or needs to be tweaked, or whatever the right word will turn out to be, to match the concern. So if we have some level of review that doesn't go any deeper than it has to, but goes deep enough to satisfy us that everything is going to line up in a way that we can be comfortable, one way or the other. As Joe said, if we either we have solid grounds for denial, if that's what it comes to, or we have defensible grounds for approving it, that everything seems to meet all the necessary criteria.
We obviously want the board to be comfortable, so. I
Right.
mean, that's-
Mr. Chairman, I've
that's
sat on a
what
board
they'll say.
in my town for the better part of 25 years, and I've sat with Mr. Hassinger on CMRPC. I know the position of the board. So with that, we want everybody comfortable with the decision that's going to be made, especially these new members of the board. Boy, did you guys have a doozy tonight.
Hey, next
So-
meeting we got a cell tower. You want to come for
Nice.
that?
that sounds like a
Don't
lot of fun.
resign after this, we need you guys.
So with that said, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, would respectfully request a continuation to the public hearing in order that the board can move forward with, securing whatever services they feel are necessary to.
Do we have a sense of how much time would likely be required for that level of review on our behalf, and then any follow-up responses from the applicant and the commenters?
I might suggest that we just continue to the next meeting, find out where we are at that point. We don't necessarily have to
That could work.
take a lot of testimony at that point.
Right. Yeah, the idea there being that we're sort of, we're not 100% sure at this point who we are going to get, and
How we're gonna get any
what the
help, any
scope,
advice.
what the scope of the review likely would be. So, a continuation simply the next meeting for staff to reach out and try to get some basic answers for us as to what we can expect for a review and what the scope would be, so
Or
on and so
comes
forth.
back with a review, complete and all set.
Yeah.
So we have-
If you don't know about it's really not this same case, but it's close to it. There was a house on Cortland Way, which had some problems with a hillside and, okay, you know what I'm talking
I'm
about?
aware, yes.
Okay, now I think about that.
I got the phone call to try to fix it. So,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like I'm all set.
Left that one
I
alone.
got enough problems, I don't need that one, thank you.
So our next
Thank you
meeting
for
is
sharing.
July 8th would be our next meeting, and
Sure.
we can continue to July 8th, and then we will know a lot. We hopefully will know a lot more by then about what else we're going to do going forward.
Sounds
Understood.
good.
And
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
get a better sense of when we can wrap this up.
Sounds great.
Thank you very much.
I don't want it to drag on any longer than it has to, but I do want to make sure that it gets enough time so that we've all done it justice.
Well, we're just glad that it's continuing because we get to hang out with you folks again. It's nice to see you got reelected,
Hey,
So we appreciate it, folks.
Thank you
okay.
for
Thank
extending
you.
the meeting too, then.
Okay, I move that we grant the applicant's written request to continue the meeting until July eighth at 7:30.
Yes. Second.
Moved and seconded that we grant the applicant's written request to continue the hearing. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
We're not finished yet. Yeah. You're finished, but
And,
Folks.
and Wayne, we have to touch base. I mean, there's 41 exhibits.
Yep.
There's a couple things that we need to just make sure that we fully have on that list. And because there's a couple of those documents that were addressed only to Leah, that's why I want to just make sure we're dealing with everything that really the board should be considering.
Sure. So maybe tomorrow,
Thank you.
day after tomorrow, maybe?
Yeah.
Want me to reach out to you or?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks again, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you again to the public
I
that
guess
stayed
we
this
gotta
long.
figure out what we can, what should we do? What should be
Thanking
our
everyone else
next
that
action?
stayed this
Do we
long.
direct you to?
All right, so
I've already
Yeah.
emailed Jeff to get a couple companies to get contacts.
Okay.
Also, we have a regular engineering contract with
Yep.
PHB, so I'm gonna look for 2 quotes just to identify what it is and just
Because you
look
want
at
it
best
separate from that.
accounting practices as far as just checking into that.
So at this
Okay.
point, there no further
so
vote
this
of
is
the
what
board
you're
is
submitting,
required.
that's what will be,
No.
Okay.
Direction of staff.
Dave, if we could jump back to the appointments, I want to nominate Linda to to be a second member of the Common Study Committee.
Okay, so, at the request of Bob, we will circle back to action item 2A, board reorganization.
Yeah, Linda expressed an interest in the Center Study Committee. And we can definitely have two board members on it, should we ever actually convene. So I'd nominate her as a second board representative on that.
I'll second that.
And that as a reminder, all meetings would be public anyway, so anyone can attend.
But he knows if I'm actually on the board, he'll get me to attend.
Yeah, we'll see how many members we have before we worry about that.
Motion made and seconded to appoint Linda Hassinger to the Grafton Center Study Committee. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Move to adjourn.
Not yet.
Moly.
Yeah, the chair will not recognize a motion to adjourn quite yet.
Oh, there's still business.
General business, bills have already been circulated. Let me jump for a moment to see minutes of previous meetings. We have none. D, correspondence, anything of note in correspondence anybody wants to
Oh,
highlight?
there is one, you guys should read the one letter, the one that, tells that person to cease and desist.
Oh, yes.
It's hysterical.
But,
not
but,
within our
but
scope.
legitimately, it does raise a question that I think the board is gonna have to think about sometime. Staff, had been talking about, a need potentially to, relook at accessory apartments. Also, if you do go onto Airbnb, you can find a couple units. Right now, building has really no interest in trying to tackle any sort of enforcement. This one is a little different, but there are things that are related to accessory apartments, limited stay rentals such as Airbnbs. The state, the governor did sign legislation that basically did allow for towns to create bylaws and tax them like we have a meals tax, to gain additional revenue. There are some things around that accessory apartment thing that we should.
Revisit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, B&Bs is this idea of Airbnbs. B&Bs, of course, have been around a long time. But people forget that you do have to get permits, that you just can't say, oh, I've got an extra room in my house, and I'm going to let it, through a B&B organization. It's not legal. And yes, I think we should start to talk
Yes,
about
I
how
think right, I think that topic, needs to be put on our list of things to work on.
Yep.
The Airbnb situation particularly is something that comes up in a lot of towns and cities that they're having issues.
It'd be interesting to follow the case, though, in the correspondence. The people there may have a point of view, may have some basis on which they claim.
Well, once there's an application to the ZBA overturning, to overturn building inspector's determination, you'll get a copy of that.
That would be then an opportunity to present, like we had a prior use or something. I don't know.
All right. Moving along, do we have anything by way of staff report?
Not anything specific, at least nothing that can wait. Just as a heads up, I am looking to see for someone from Citizen Plan and Training Collaborative to come out to do some sort of training. It wouldn't be as part of a planning board meeting because, quite frankly, our agendas for the next couple months are going to be too busy. But there's a lot of things that we're going to be dealing with that literally it's diving right into the deep end. This is an example. Cell towers are an example. So that may be a good thing that then to let all members do. So that's one thing. Second, just to let you know that basically we have 2 months if we're going to do anything for fall town meeting. End of August would be when we'd need articles. We should have a conversation to see, one, if we're even up to it. Two, is there any sort of fine tuning? So an example is that when we were doing the village mixed use, and we were dealing with a lot of balls in the air dealing with that, one of the things that we did identify is that if you did have a pre-existing single family house, that you could basically rebuild that. The language that got put in really was about a cottage. So for maximum 1,400 square feet, 2 bedrooms. It didn't give the flexibility that the building inspector thought was going to happen. And I may just propose some language just to try to fine tune that. But I did explain to him that if you had an existing house, I'd expect that there would be some sort of limitation on rebuilding, that you don't take 1,100 square foot house and all of a sudden a 3,000 square foot house goes up in that place. But that would be one of the things. Also, I've had Mr. Heavey come back to the counter inquiring as far as whether the planning board would be revisiting what could occur at mills. We had previously had a discussion on, do we consider sort of a mill redevelopment bylaw. That might be too expansive to consider for the fall, given all of the possibilities, and especially because I'd want to provide the board with examples as far as how other towns deal with redevelopment of mills when they are, say, in the middle of a village area, and while they historically were used for industry, there may be multiple uses that are permitted there that may not be specifically allowed under existing bylaws. So,
But right after town meeting, seems to me like we talked a little bit about that and the possibility of getting together with a circle of, not just us, but selectmen, whomever, economic development or whatnot.
I relayed that to the chair of the Board of Selectmen, saying that we should have some sort of like development summit with because he is on the Affordable Housing Trust. We had an Affordable Housing Trust meeting last week, saying that we should really have a larger discussion. So hopefully that will be followed through, because there are a lot of things that are coming up in this next year that I think warrant some sort of larger discussion.
Yeah, I might suggest that at our next meeting, we have assembled some sort of a list of all the zoning bylaw things that we've been thinking about for the last year or two, some of these ideas, and just sort of vet that list or review that list and identify any that we might feel comfortable developing for the October town meeting.
There's barely enough time to.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's probably, you may have that list somewhere in your files, Joe, or if not, we should have kind of a list that we maintain collectively that, here's all the things we think might be useful to do with the zoning bylaw. We'll add to that list as things crop up, or maybe cross things off that we decide we don't want to do. But every year at some point before every town meeting, we try to think of what we want to do. So
And usually it becomes the list for annual town meeting in May.
Yeah, without trying
And
to
then it becomes the list for.
right, without trying to extend the discussion tonight.
No,
Yeah.
Let's just sort of review that list, once a month, if not every meeting.
Yep.
And then
Yeah,
again, see what, given what Joe has told us about the time constraints for the October town meeting, there's not a lot of heavy lifting we're likely to be able to do for that.
If we keep that, both the subdivision rules and the zoning, year after year after year, we say, we need to do something about that. Let's put it on the list. Yeah, okay, it's going on the list. Nobody has a list. I think maybe somehow having a little bit more of a, something we can go back to and review and maybe, swap priorities as time goes on, take stuff off.
Yeah, I'll just put together the sort of global list. We have done that over the last 5 years.
We don't see it. I haven't seen it.
Oh no, the board has.
Yes, I have.
But amazingly,
remember.
we've actually accomplished a lot,
I have.
Yeah.
Stuff is
and we
fine.
haven't had easy things.
Okay,
Let's keep it up.
I believe you.
Anything else from the staff?
No, that's basically.
Do you have a summer intern?
Potentially 2. I may split things up and do 2, because we are. There are 2 people that I'm like, okay, well, I might need more resources for viewpoint implementation, and then someone for the zoning stuff. So I have one final interview coming up this week, and then right following that, I'll be at least offering something.
Okay. Now can I do it?
Do we have any reports from planning board representatives and committees in the CMRPC? I have nothing. The chair would entertain a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
I was waiting for her, but she,
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.